Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a time and place where everything is polished silver and social class. But you're not here to enjoy the luxury. Nope, you're here to live beneath it. In fact, you probably won't survive this. You're about to become a servant in an Edwardian household, and let's just say, your back will never be the same again. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love seeing that. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before the sun, not metaphorically, like literally, before it even starts thinking about rising. The world is black and silent, except for the ticking of a distant grandfather clock upstairs and the slow creak of old beams above your head. You're in the basement, or near enough to it. It's freezing. The sort of cold that doesn't feel dramatic or exciting, just quietly humiliating. Your thin wool blanket has slipped halfway off during the night, and there's no point pulling it back up. The alarm bell, that isn't for you, will be ringing soon enough. You roll over and sit up on the lumpy cot you share a wall with. You can hear someone in the next room already, probably Maggie. She's always up before everyone, as if she's trying to outrun the day. The wash basin is waiting for you. You splash your face with water that might as well be liquid ice, and quickly dry it with a rag that smells faintly of last week's coal dust. Then you dress in near darkness. Because candles aren't free and neither is time. Your uniform is stiff from yesterday's starch, and your apron has a stubborn stain from gravy that decided to leap off a plate. You tug your hair into something that passes for tidy, pin your cap into place, and slip your feet into leather shoes that were never made to fit quite right. They squeak a bit when you walk, but they'll quiet down by the time you're halfway up the stairs, as the cold numbs your toes. The dormitory you share is cramped and barely heated. You bump your elbow on someone's washstand, knock into a trunk and curse under your breath, which is exactly the kind of thing that could get you scolded if the housekeeper were already listening. She's not yet, but you still whisper an apology to no one in particular. You're trained for silence. Out in the hallway, the gas lights are out and flicker weakly. You're not supposed to light them without permission, but someone has. Probably Alfred, the footman, who's always a little too eager for praise. You climb the back stairs, careful to keep to the side so they don't creak. You know every noisy board by heart. Upstairs, the house sleeps in layers of velvet and silence. Down here, your day is already halfway begun. Your first job is the fires. They went out sometime in the night, and that means the drawing rooms are stone cold. You kneel on numb knees and scoop ash from yesterday's embers, layering kindling and coal like you've done 1,000 times. You don't think about it. You just do it. One room, then the next, then another. The gloves you wear are fingerless, and your nails are always black no matter how often you scrub. Smoke clings to your apron. Your eyes sting, you don't sneeze, you learn early not to. Next, the chamber pots. You carry them like they're fine china, which is both ironic and necessary. Sloshing is a death sentence. If not literal, then professional. If you spill even a drop on the carpet or your uniform, you'll be scrubbing steps for a week. The masters never see this part. They think of you as a quiet blur in the background, not as the person responsible for carrying their secrets in porcelain bowls. As you walk through the service corridors, the walls are close and narrow. This isn't the house you see on postcards. These passages weren't made for beauty. They were made for speed, silence, and the occasional scolding from the cook if you're in her way. Speaking of which, the kitchen is already humming. The cook is muttering about lard again. You make yourself invisible, which is your real job anyway. There's a strange comfort in the rhythm of the morning. It's mechanical, like you're part of the house itself. No one says good morning, there's no time for that. Everything's too quiet, too rushed. You've developed a kind of sixth sense for when someone's coming down the hall, especially someone important. It's like you can feel their footsteps in the floorboards before you hear them. If it's the butler, you straighten. If it's the housekeeper, you swallow any hint of a complaint. And then there's the breakfast prep. You're not in the kitchen, not exactly, that's above your rank. But you're close enough to be sweating near the stoves. The scullery maid is elbow deep in suds, scrubbing pans the size of carriage wheels. The cook barks orders without looking up. You carry trays, polish glasses, fold napkins. It's a ballet of heat, knives and whispered tension. Upstairs, the family will wake soon, and the illusion of effortless luxury must already be in motion. It's strange. You see so much of this house, yet you're never meant to be seen. You memorize its every corner, its its creaks, its moods, its smells, but only so you can disappear into it. Here's your historical fact for the night. In large Edwardian households, it wasn't uncommon for there to be more servants than actual family members. Some homes had 20, 30, even 40 servants, maintaining the illusion of effortless grace. Here's your weird one. There was a real black market for second-hand livery. Ex-servants, or ones who'd stolen them, could sell uniforms for good money to imposters pretending to be in service as ways to gain entry to homes for theft or scams. And the scholarly debate? Some historians argue Edwardian servants were the backbone of the household economy and proud of their roles. Others say this is a rose-tinted view, and the reality was exploitation painted with Victorian manners. Both could be true, depends on who you were and who you served. You take a breath. Your hands smell like coal and lemon polish. You're already tired, and it's not even 6 o'clock, but the day hasn't really started. Not until they ring the first bell. You know the house intimately by now, not just the grand drawing rooms with ceilings like icing, but the crooked floorboards behind the panelling, the stiff door that sticks near the morning room, the slow-turning dumbwaiter that groans when it's overloaded. It's still early, but the house is beginning to stir, not loudly, it's never loud upstairs. Just the faint hush of a floorboard groaning under soft slippers, or the flick of a curtain being drawn open by someone who hasn't seen a mop in their life. Downstairs, you're halfway through lighting the last fire when the first bell rings. It's not a loud clang or a dramatic toll, just a sharp little ding from a brass dial in the servants' hall, but it means everything. Bell number 3, that's Miss Victoria's bedroom, and she's early today. Of course she is. You groan internally, straighten your apron, and move. There's no running, servants don't run, you walk briskly, precisely. Your footsteps a steady rhythm against the worn runners of the back stairs. The narrow passage winds you upward, past thick brick and plaster walls. The air gets warmer, sweeter the higher you climb. Like the stink of sweat and coal is sealed downstairs, and up here it's all lavender sachets and rosewater. When you arrive at her door, you knock exactly once and enter without waiting. That's the rule. Too much hesitation and you're told you're slow, too little and you're called disrespectful. The art of service is to be fast and invisible, like a ghost but polite. Miss Victoria is seated at her vanity, a lace dressing gown wrapped over her nightdress. Her hair's a mess of chestnut waves she hasn't yet brushed. She doesn't look at you, not directly. She lifts her chin and says, "Tea." You know what that means. The tray is already on its way. Someone from below brought it up 5 minutes ago, anticipating the bell. You walk softly across the room, open the door to the sitting area, and retrieve it. 2 cups, steaming already. You place the tray on the small table beside her and wait. She doesn't thank you, she doesn't need to, the social code doesn't allow for that. But she lets out a small approving hum that you recognise as a form of positive feedback. Maybe, possibly, you never really know. You step back, hands folded, eyes lowered. You're there, but you're not. She suddenly sighs and says, "The pink gloves, not the ivory ones. This is your real job, not just fires and pots and cleaning. It's interpreting vague orders given half-breathed into the air, filtering emotionless commands and adapting to whims before they become complaints." You nod and retrieve the gloves from the wardrobe. She doesn't notice that you've arranged them by colour and season. She never does, but you do it anyway. As you glide back down the hall, the bells have started a symphony. One by one, the brass dials quiver and ring. Each is labelled with the room it connects to: breakfast room, drawing room, ladies' boudoir, nursery. You have less than 3 minutes to answer a bell. That's the unspoken rule. Any longer and questions start to swirl. Was she dawdling, lost, disrespectful? The servant hierarchy keeps everything sharp. Your place is just above the scullery maid, but far below the housekeeper, who at this very moment is inspecting the hallways with her eagle eyes, running her gloved hand along the ledges, checking for dust. There is no dust. There hasn't been dust in this house since 1875, but she always finds some. The footman breezes past you, smelling of starch and hair oil. His uniform gleams. Footmen are the peacocks of the household, seen, polished, decorative. They carry trays and open doors with unnecessary flourishes. But they're also paid more than you, and no one asks them to clean out chamber pots. Life isn't fair, life in service is even less so. Back in the servants' hall, there's a moment, just a sliver, where you get to sit. Not for rest, of course, but for assignment. The under-butler, clipboard in hand, doles out duties like a general before battle. You're polishing silver today. 6 dozen forks, 12 fish knives, and a few hundred teaspoons that were last used once and haven't seen a human lip since. You nod, not that you have a choice. The silver room is chilly and smells of chalky paste. You sit at a long table, cloth spread out, and begin rubbing small pieces of aristocracy into mirror shine. Over and over, fork, cloth, twist, inspect. It's meditative in a way. Mindless repetition that lets your thoughts drift. Sometimes you imagine just walking out the front door. No more bells, no more silence. Just a pair of boots, a train ticket, and the wind in your hair. But then someone drops a fork and the dream shatters. Here's your historical fact. The average maid in a large Edwardian household worked around 16 hours a day, 6.5 days a week. Sundays were technically half days off, but that often just meant fewer chores and more church. Here's your weird fringe fact. Some high society families had very specific, often bizarre house rules for their staff. In one household, maids were forbidden from using the front staircase even if the back stairs were on fire, and the open debate. Historians still argue whether this rigid domestic system was cruel or simply the expected trade for shelter and security. For many working-class women, service was one of the only available options. Was it exploitative or empowering in a grim sort of way? The sun is up now, though you hardly noticed. Your hands are sore from polishing. The call bells are still ringing. The house is fully awake, and you're already wondering when, if, you'll get to sit again. There are rules, and then there are rules. Some written, most not. And in an Edwardian household, they hold more weight than gravity. You don't question them, you don't break them, and you definitely don't talk back to them. Not unless you want to find yourself out on the street with a suitcase, no references, and the sort of reputation that sticks like soot. The household hierarchy is the first rule you learn, and it's carved into the very bones of the house, tighter than the moulding on the ceilings. You, dear listener, are on the bottom rung. Technically, you're a second housemaid. That means you're allowed upstairs to dust and tidy, but only the second-tier spaces. You don't go into the master's suite unless the first housemaid is sick, or dead, and even then, you'd better walk like you're balancing a cup of tea on your head and pray you don't smudge a doorknob. Above you is the first housemaid, then the lady's maid. The lady's maid is like a duchess in uniform, wholly off limits to critique, loyal to her mistress and paid double what you earn. You're not meant to be friends with her, you're not meant to speak to her unless spoken to, and the lady's maid isn't even the top of the pyramid. Above her is the housekeeper. She has her own office, keys to every room, and a look that can reduce you to ash. If the household is a ship, she's the one steering it with a gloved hand and a steely eye. She keeps records of all linens, orders, schedules, and staff misdemeanours. Her bookkeeping is immaculate. You suspect she even logs your size. And let's not forget the men. The butler is the lord of the belowstairs domain. He floats between worlds, charming the guests upstairs, ordering the wine, and ensuring that the footmen remember their Latin mottos during dinner service. He's aloof with greying temples and polished shoes that never seem to scuff. He doesn't speak to you unless you're in trouble, or unless the housekeeper is too busy to shoulder you herself. The footmen, in all their tailored glory, strut around with trays and cocked elbows. They look nice on staircases. They're hired tall, handsome, and symmetrical. One of them, Jonathan, is missing a back tooth but smiles with closed lips and never gets caught. You envy his ability to exist upstairs, in front of people, while you vanish into the seams of the wallpaper. Beneath you there's the scullery maid. Poor Lottie. She's 14, barely taller than the stove, and already has wrists like an old woman. Her job is perpetual damp. Peeling, scrubbing, washing, hauling water. No one helps her, except sometimes when the cook is distracted and you sneak her a crust of bread and a wink. Then there's the boot boy. Nameless, silent, almost mythical. He sleeps near the cellar and spends his life shining leather. You once saw him blink twice in a row, and it felt like witnessing a miracle. What all this means is that every step you take is political. Every conversation below stairs happens through a veil of rank. You don't just sit at the table in the servants' hall, you sit in your seat. And heaven help you if you take someone else's, especially someone higher. A new parlour maid once took the under-butler's chair by mistake. He didn't say a word, he just moved her plate 3 inches to the left. She cried in the scullery for a week. Mealtimes are their own sort of battlefield. The food's plain but hot, which is a blessing in winter. Boiled meats, root vegetables, bread thick enough to choke a bishop. You eat fast, politely, and with both ears open. Gossip is the only dessert served in this house. Who snuck a letter out? Who was spotted leaving the butler's pantry with hair undone? Who's late again? And who might be in danger of being replaced by someone cheaper, or quieter, or whiter? You do all this while making sure your apron isn't wrinkled, your hands aren't stained, and your posture isn't too relaxed. Slouching is a moral failing, apparently. Here's your historical fact. Large Edwardian estates functioned on this military-like hierarchy for efficiency. Each role had precise duties, and no one crossed into another's territory. The structure kept the house running like clockwork, but also ensured everyone knew exactly how unimportant they were. And your odd fringe fact, some butlers kept personal scrapbooks of all the gossip and infractions in the house, not because they were petty, but because they might use them later to protect themselves from blame. Basically, proto-blackmail with a side of silver polish. The open debate? Some social historians argue that the servant hierarchy was internalised so deeply that it actually gave workers a sense of identity and pride. Others suggest it only reinforced class trauma, stifled solidarity, and pitted workers against each other in a twisted form of self-policing. Again, depends on who you ask, and whether they ever cleaned soot from a chandelier. Back in the hallway, you pass Alfred, the junior footman, who gives you a crooked smile. He whispers, "She's in a mood," and tilts his head toward the breakfast room. You already know who he means. Lady Honoria has been on edge since her sister was rumoured to be involved with a portrait painter. Scandalous, common, bohemian, all the worst things. You tighten your apron strings and nod. Mood or not, you'll be bringing her toast in 3 minutes. Lightly browned, one side only, no crusts, served on her favourite bone china plate with the green vine pattern. The one she claims matches her eyes. You don't speak to her, you don't dare. You hold the tray perfectly level, step into the room when the bell rings again, and place it on the sideboard like you were never there. She doesn't look up. She's already reading the Times upside down, and then you vanish, back into the hall, the tray lighter, the weight somehow heavier. The bells never stop. It's not just the little dings in the servants' hall, those metallic whispers that summon you from room to room. It's the bigger bells too, the ones you don't hear but feel. Time, schedules, rituals, rules, they govern your day like the hands of some enormous invisible clock, and the slightest misstep sends the whole mechanism wobbling out of sync. You know this because once you were 7 minutes late delivering an afternoon tea tray, and the butler's right eyebrow hasn't come down since. You don't wear a watch, you don't need one. Your internal clock has been wound tight by the house's rhythms. Breakfast at exactly 8:15. Fireplaces attended by 6:30, silver laid out for polishing by 9, boots shined by sunrise, and always the bells. They are not just tools of communication, they're declarations. Each one is a reminder that your time is not your own. Your body, your steps, your energy, all belong to the house. The call bell board in the servants' hall is a polished oak contraption, with a row of tiny brass pointers that jerk and ring whenever someone upstairs pulls the cord in their room. Each pointer is labelled morning room, nursery, master's, dressing room, library. When one of them quivers, you're expected to drop everything, interpret its meaning, and respond within minutes. There's no system of knowing what they want. No message comes with the bell. It's a guessing game seasoned with panic. You learn fast. Miss Victoria's second bell usually means she wants someone to fetch her gloves from the music room. Or maybe she spilled her perfume. Or possibly she's just bored and needs a person to sigh at. The housekeeper, Mrs. Fenley, once said, "A servant must never make themselves memorable. That's the guiding principle of your life now. Efficient invisibility. If someone remembers you, it's almost always because you've done something wrong. Or worse, something noticeable. A misplaced sigh, a loud shoe squeak, a cough that echoes up the wrong stairwell. All of it is, somehow, your fault. This brings us to the rota. It's a scroll of doom pinned to the notice board in the hallway between the larder and the linen room. Every Sunday evening, the new rota appears like a papal decree. It lists your tasks for the week, day by day, hour by hour. Window washing, chandelier dusting, hallway polishing, stair skirting, sweeping. Some days you're assigned to general duties, which is code for you'll be running up and down 3 floors until your legs beg for mercy. You don't question the rota. You copy your assignments down onto a scrap of paper, or, if you're particularly daring, commit them to memory. Woe unto the maid who forgets she's assigned to silver polish and boot prep on the same morning. The butler doesn't shout. He just writes a note in the record book and lets that ruin your next reference letter. On Tuesday mornings, you clean the upper floor windows. From the inside, of course, servants don't go out on ledges. That would draw attention. You stretch on tiptoes, balancing a cloth and a bucket, careful not to splash anything on the silk drapes. The windows are tall and draughty, and the glass always seems to smirk at you with its smudges. You once read that Queen Victoria hated seeing handprints on glass and fired a maid for a single smear. No idea if that's true, but it haunts you every time the light hits wrong. Let's talk about timing. You could do every single task on your rota perfectly, but if you do them 5 minutes too early or 3 minutes too late, it still counts as a failure. The masters expect the drawing room fire to be lit just as they enter, not before when it would be too warm, and not after when they'd have to wait. The tea must arrive just before they ask for it, but never so soon that it seems presumptuous. There's a window of exactly 1 minute in which you are considered flawless. Outside that, you're inefficient, impolite, disappointing. Your only moment of stillness comes during the hallway standing posts. That's when you stand by a particular door, not moving, not speaking, not even blinking too much in case someone inside needs something. You're not even allowed to look directly at the door. You just exist there, like a coat rack with a pulse, until dismissed. Once, you stood outside the morning room for 45 minutes while Lady Honoria argued with her cousin about the correct way to pronounce bouillon. She never called for you. But if she had, and you hadn't been there, that would have been your final shift. Here's your historical fact. In many grand Edwardian houses, servants worked on what was called the split shift, starting at dawn, getting a short break in the late morning, then working again until the family went to bed. That meant most maids averaged about 80 or 100 hours a week, with zero overtime and no say in their schedule. Now here's a fringe fact for your sleepy brain. Some call bell systems were rigged to track the number of times each servant was called, essentially ranking them on speed, accuracy, and how often they were needed. In a way, it was like an early, terrible version of a customer service rating system. But instead of stars, you got glares and possibly fired, and the debate. Historians are still discussing whether the strict regulation of servant schedules was a reflection of efficiency or oppression. Some say it was necessary to manage the enormous machine of a country estate. Others argue it was a deliberate tool to suppress autonomy and ensure dependence. Were you just a cog, or something even smaller? Back in the servants' hall, the call bell dings again. Library. That's Lady Honoria's domain, and she's not exactly known for patience. You tighten your apron, square your shoulders, and disappear into the quiet labyrinth above. You pass portraits of people who've never polished a single thing in their lives, their oil-painted eyes watching you like they know you're not supposed to be here. The bell dings again, louder this time. She's waiting. You arrive just before her third ring. She looks up from her book and says, without meeting your eyes, "Be a dear and fetch my green shawl, won't you?" She doesn't say, "Please." She never does. And yet, you nod and curtsy, already moving. The rhythm continues. The rota rolls on. You carry the green shawl with both hands, folded just right. It's cashmere, delicate, and it smells faintly of violets and dust. You could drop it. Nothing terrible would happen. But you don't. You treat it like it's sacred. Because everything upstairs is sacred, even the things they forget they own. The shawl was probably a gift from someone she no longer speaks to. A cousin in Sussex, a rejected suitor, a dressmaker who fell out of favour for choosing the wrong trim. It doesn't matter. You deliver it without a word, set it gently onto the edge of the chaise, and disappear again before she changes her mind. You haven't eaten today, or rather, you've nibbled. Half a biscuit snagged in the kitchen when cook wasn't looking. A sliver of cheese you found wrapped in a handkerchief in your apron pocket, left over from yesterday's supper, still edible more or less. That's the unspoken code of the household. You eat when you can, not when you're hungry. Your real job is to make sure they're never hungry, and now it's breakfast time. For them, you're not just preparing food, you're staging a performance. The breakfast room has to be perfect, curtains pulled back to let in just enough golden morning light, but not so much that it reveals the dust that definitely isn't there. A central table with gleaming silver covers over hot dishes, china laid out matching of course, with each spoon and fork placed as if the Queen herself might wander in. The newspapers are ironed. Yes, actually ironed, so the ink doesn't rub off on soft, uncalloused hands. The toast? Cut into neat triangles and served in a rack designed to let air circulate and keep the slices crisp. The butter must be cold but soft, the eggs must be runny but not too runny. The bacon must curl but not crisp. The housemaid's mantra, if they notice it, you've done it wrong. While you and the others silently glide around the breakfast table like shadows with trays, the family floats in like it's a stage play. Lord Halberton enters first, as always, with his moustache already combed and a copy of the Times under one arm. He nods to the butler, who bows just slightly, and then slides into his usual seat. Lady Honoria is 10 minutes behind, in a silk robe the colour of weak tea, with a scowl that says someone has already disappointed her. And it might be you. No one speaks to you directly, not unless they need something. You refill coffee, you correct the angle of a misplaced spoon. You catch, just in time, a grape rolling off the fruit tray toward the edge of the sideboard. You pocket it. No one notices. The strange thing about serving breakfast is how close you are to their lives, and how distant. You're in the room while they talk about politics, scandals, their plans for the day. You hear everything, but you're trained not to react, not to think. You're a pair of hands in a pressed apron, not a person with ears and thoughts and a deep need to sneeze. When breakfast ends, you clear the table like a magician doing sleight of hand. Quiet, fluid, almost invisible. Then it's down the back stairs again, the ones with the worn treads and the smell of old varnish, to the kitchen. Dishes, so many dishes. You're not the one doing them today, that's Lottie's job. But you help stack and carry and scrape, or you've learnt to suppress your gag reflex. You've seen eggs do things eggs were never meant to do. And then, for 10 glorious minutes, you sit. Not in the dining room, of course. The servants' hall is where you gather, when you're allowed to. The long wooden table is scratched and stained with generations of spilled tea and elbow grease. You take the seat assigned to your rank. The under-butler sits at the head. The cook has her own corner. You pour yourself a weak cup of tea that tastes vaguely of tin and exhaustion. Then you breathe. Someone tells a joke. It's not funny, but you laugh anyway. You feel the echo of yesterday's aches in your shoulders, and you know tomorrow's will be worse. Maggie says she saw the lady's maid crying in the linen closet again. No one says anything, but you all nod a little. Your break ends before it even begins. The bell rings again. Not urgent, just constant. You rise not because you want to, but because it's what you do. Let's take a breath and look at your historical fact. Edwardian breakfasts were often multi-course affairs, especially in wealthy homes. Kedgeree, devilled kidneys, cold meats, poached eggs, marmalade, buttered toast, and at least 2 types of tea were standard offerings. It was less a meal and more a morning parade. And here's your fringe fact. Ironing newspapers was a real thing in elite households. It wasn't just to keep hands clean, it also helped flatten the paper so it turned crisply, reducing that rustling sound that some aristocrats found too vulgar for breakfast time. Now for the scholarly debate. Some argue that this level of formality, the food rituals, the staff choreography, the timed courses, wasn't just about taste, it was a psychological tool, reinforcing control and status. If your breakfast arrives exactly how you like it every day without ever asking, it means the world bends for you. Others say it was simply tradition. Harmless routine carried forward from Victorian habit. Either way, it meant a lot of burnt fingers and spilled tea for people like you. You finish clearing the breakfast dishes and glance at the time. Well, not a clock, you don't need one. You can just feel it. In half an hour it'll be time to polish the brass in the front hall. After that, the piano keys in the drawing room. Then the library fireplace again, even though no one used it. Then the second floor carpet beating if it doesn't rain. Then back to the kitchen to help with luncheon prep. You haven't even reached noon yet, and your stomach still grumbles. Luncheon is still 2 hours away, but the cleaning begins now, because in this world food is never served without a performance, and no guest ever dines in a dusty room. Not that you have ever seen dust here, or rather, you see it constantly, but only in the way a soldier sees the battlefield. You've been trained to hunt it, sniff it out, sense it hiding behind curtains, tucked into the corners of carved baseboards and along the grooves of banister rails. Dust, in this house, is a personal insult to the family's social standing and to your competency. So you clean, again and again. Today you've been assigned the formal drawing room, which sounds lovely, except it isn't. It's enormous, sun-soaked and packed with ornate furniture that exists solely to mock your spine. There are silk chairs with carved lion feet, side tables that teeter on spindly legs, marble-topped consoles with golden inlays, and a piano that no one's played in 6 years but must gleam like it was tuned yesterday. You approach each surface like a diplomat at a royal court, careful, deliberate, terrified of offence. You start with the fireplace even though it hasn't been used in days. You brush the grate, sweep the hearth, and polish the brass fender, until you can see your warped reflection in it. Then you wipe down the mantelshelf, removing and replacing each decorative trinket, the bone china dog, the crystal vase, the small clock that never ticks but always collects fingerprints. The whole process takes 30 minutes, and by the time you're finished your right arm is aching, but it's not over. You turn to the windows next, pulling back the heavy drapes and stepping onto the broad-worn window seat. From this height, the gardens look almost peaceful. Sculpted hedges, trimmed roses, gravel paths looping through green. It's beautiful, but you know better. You know the gardeners rise as early as you do. You've seen them bent over the earth in silence, digging, weeding, pruning. Another army in another uniform, toiling invisibly to maintain the illusion. You dust the sash, clean the inner panes, and swipe away any speck of cobweb near the corners. Then you fold the drapes back with the velvet ties. One loop, two, with the ends trailing just so. You step down and check your handiwork. It's not good, it's perfect. And still, the housekeeper will find something. She always does. The carpet is next. Persian, heavy, with a pattern so intricate you have to squint to tell if that's a stain or just part of the design. You kneel, brush in hand, and sweep along the grain. Someone once told you that in the best homes, even the floor feels expensive underfoot. You wouldn't know. You never walk on these rugs with your boots on. You tiptoe around them like they're sacred, because they are. Then come the mirrors, the picture frames, the baseboards, the lamps, the brass door handle, which has to gleam just enough to reflect the chandelier light without showing a single fingerprint. And finally the piano. You hate the piano. Not because it's hard to clean, it isn't, once you know the right way to angle the cloth, but because every time you touch it, you remember that you used to play. Not well, not formally. But your brother once found a broken down upright in a school cellar, and you both took turns plunking out tunes you barely knew. You had a favourite, something soft and minor, but you've forgotten the name now. It's buried somewhere under years of ash and polish. You slide the cloth across the ivory keys, one by one, careful not to press too hard. No sound. No echo, just the clean, silent shimmer of effort unrecognised. Let's not romanticise this. Cleaning in an Edwardian house is relentless. It isn't dusting for 15 minutes before tea with a spritz of lemon spray. It's war. Daily, unglamorous, bone-deep war. And you're not the only soldier. Downstairs, Lottie is boiling the laundry water, her face pink from steam and her arms raw from soap. In the kitchen, the cook is snapping at the undermaid because the aspic hasn't set right, and the jelly looks like it's been stepped on. In the larder, someone is reorganising the cold shelves for the third time this week. Everyone's moving, everyone's tired, everyone's pretending not to be. Here's your historical fact. Edwardian housemaids were often responsible for an astonishing range of tasks. Sometimes cleaning as many as 10 to 15 rooms a day, each to exacting standards. They used vinegar, newspaper, cold tea, beeswax, and even breadcrumbs to clean surfaces and remove marks without damaging delicate furniture. Your fringe fact? Some households hired a dusting maid whose only job was to go through every public room with a feather duster and keep everything spotless at all hours. These maids were expected to memorise the position of every object and restore anything that had been moved even half an inch. And the debate? There's an ongoing discussion among social historians about the psychological toll of this type of cleaning labour. Some argue that the repetitiveness, combined with the constant scrutiny, led to chronic anxiety, and even what we'd now call obsessive-compulsive behaviours. Others suggest that for some workers, there was comfort in routine, a strange sense of control in a world where they had almost none. You're not sure where you fall. All you know is that your right wrist is sore again, and the tiny nick on your knuckle from the brass candlestick has started to bleed through your glove. You suck it quietly and move on. No time to stop. Luncheon begins in an hour and someone will have to lay the table. The drawing room is gleaming now, brighter than it was when the family entered it last night. But they'll never notice. That's the point. You're not cleaning for compliments. You're cleaning to maintain the fiction, that the house is alive, immaculate and somehow magical, that no one toils, that everything is effortless. You close the door behind you and press your back against the polished wood. Your stomach growls again, but the kitchen smells of roast beef and parsnips, and the cook has no patience for snacking maids. You head for the hallway instead, where the bell rings twice, sharp and quick. That's the signal for table service. Time to polish your posture, straighten your apron, and disappear all over again. You don't knock on the door, you don't need to, you just slip in, silent as breath, with the hem of your skirt skimming the carpet. The lady is waiting, though she'd never say she's been waiting. Ladies never wait. They expect. And what she expects right now is you, ready, quiet and composed, for the ritual that is dressing. You've already laid out her clothes. That was part of the morning flurry when you brought in the tea and pretended not to notice her yawning without a handkerchief. The gown she chose today is pale blue with lace trim, buttoned from the back, an impossible feat to manage alone, which is why you're here. She stands at the centre of her room in her chemise and corset, arms lifted slightly, like a delicate statue being prepared for exhibition. "Start with the laces," she says, in a tone that suggests she shouldn't have to say anything at all. You step behind her, fingers already moving. The corset is stiff with whalebone, laced so tightly it squeaks when pulled. You thread the laces through the eyelets, slowly drawing them together, and begin the process of cinching. Not too fast, not too slow. There's a rhythm to it, like breathing backwards. She exhales. You pull. She inhales. You pause. "Snug, not strangled," she says, half smiling, and you force your hands to relax. It's easy to get lost in the tugging. There's a certain resentment that bubbles up while compressing another person's ribs. You squash it down. She didn't design the corset, she just wears it. When the lacing is finished, you move on to the buttons. Tiny fabric-covered pearls arranged in a row that snakes up her spine. Each one is fiddly, slippery, and takes a small eternity to fasten. Your fingertips are numb from morning polishing, but you don't let that slow you down. Button, breath, button, breath. As you dress her, she talks. Not to you exactly, just to the room. About an invitation to a garden party, about the weather in Bath, about how Lady Finch's daughter wore entirely too much rouge last season. You nod when appropriate, laugh softly if she chuckles, and keep your eyes on the buttons. This is what intimacy looks like when it's one-sided. You're handling her under things, pinning up her hair, dabbing rose water behind her ears, and yet you're invisible. A warm presence without substance. She calls you by name, but only when she needs something. The moment she's fully dressed, she'll forget you were ever here. She sits down at her vanity and you take your place behind her, gently combing through her long chestnut hair. She's lucky. It's thick and healthy and curls easily, which means you can work quickly without tugging. She sighs as you brush, like it relaxes her. It might. You wouldn't know. No one brushes your hair. As you pin it up, 3 curls pinned to the left, 1 twist across the nape, the rest gathered at the crown, she asks, "Do you think it's too much for luncheon?" You pause, surprised. She rarely asks your opinion. You're not entirely sure if she's being rhetorical. "No, miss," you say gently. "It suits you." She smiles into the mirror. Not at you, but at her reflection. Good. You've witnessed this dance before, many times. Lady dressing for lunch is less about the outfit and more about the performance. The way she sits, the angle of her head, how she adjusts the brooch at her collar. Everything about her presentation must appear effortless, just as yours must appear non-existent. Once she's satisfied, she stands, gives herself a once-over in the long mirror, and finally says, "You may go." And just like that, you vanish. Let's pause for your historical fact. In Edwardian society, dressing a lady was considered a skilled position. A lady's maid was not just a dresser. She often acted as a personal assistant, hairdresser, seamstress, and confidant. The position was well paid for a servant, and came with higher status than most female roles in service. And the weird fringe fact, many ladies' maids had their own clients in high society. They could be lent out to friends for special occasions, or even travel with the family on holiday. One well-known maid from the early 1900s was said to have had her own monogram trunk, though she still wasn't allowed to dine with the family, of course. Now for the debate. So scholars argue over the psychological toll of this hyper-intimate servitude. Was the close proximity to luxury a form of empowerment, or a constant reminder of what could never be theirs? Some maids formed strong attachments to their mistresses, while others simply counted the days until they could escape to a quieter life. The emotional boundaries were blurry, and the consequences of crossing them, either too cold or too familiar, could be swift and severe. Back in the hallway, you tug your apron straight and smooth your hair back beneath your cap. The house is stirring again. More bells, more footsteps, and somewhere, the cook is shouting about overboiled leeks. You barely hear it. You're thinking about the smell of rosewater that still clings to your hands. You pass another maid on the stairs, Maggie, red-cheeked and breathless. And you give her a look that says, "Yes, still going." She nods in sympathy. Below stairs, the luncheon table is being set. Polished silver, crisp napkins and little flower arrangements that took an hour to perfect. But your next task isn't there. You're being sent to the linen room, where a pile of freshly laundered sheets waits to be ironed and folded. Not by machine, by hand. Every crease pressed, every corner square. Because this house is not just about cleanliness, it's about precision. You're not simply folding sheets, you're maintaining a world where nothing looks like work was ever done. And soon it'll be time to carry those sheets back upstairs, slide them into a linen press, and pretend they appeared there by magic. You didn't ask to be compared to a television show, but here we are. The new parlour maid, fresh from a town job where the only silver she polished was teaspoons, whispers in the scullery, eyes wide and shining. It's just like Downton Abbey, isn't it? You almost drop the tea tray. It's not like Downton Abbey, at all. But you don't say that. You smile, tuck a curl behind your ear, and nod. Because she'll find out soon enough. Give her a week, 2 if she's lucky. When her knuckles are raw from scrubbing stair rods and her back aches from hauling coals, she'll see the difference between a scripted drama and the reality of service. The costumes are accurate, yes. The food's about right. The accent's passable. But no episode captures the silence, the sore feet, the clenching dread when you hear the bell ring again and know it's for you. You think of that scene she loves, the one where the servants are laughing around the table, sharing a cosy breakfast, all camaraderie and banter. That's fantasy. In your world you eat quickly, quietly, and in strict order of rank. No one talks back to the butler unless they have a death wish. No one flirts in the hallway, at least not where the housekeeper can see, and if anyone breaks a plate, there's no light chuckle and a clever quip. There's scrubbing duty, possibly a docking of wages. Reality is different. Downton doesn't show the sting of chilblains in winter, when your boots leak and your gloves are still damp from the day before. It doesn't show how long it takes to make a bed properly, tight enough to bounce a coin, smooth enough to look like no one ever slept there. It doesn't show the scullery maid weeping silently over a sink full of greasy pans, while everyone else is upstairs arranging orchids and acting important. But here's the thing, you understand why people want to believe it. The myth of the kindly employer, the noble sacrifice, the self-respecting servant who's treated like family, it's comforting. It makes the past seem softer than it was, easier to digest. Like you could live in this world as long as you had a bit of pluck and some warm socks. The truth? You're exhausted. Your hands are chapped and cracked. You've cleaned the same banister 4 times today, and you'll clean it again tomorrow. You haven't written a letter home in 3 weeks because your only free hour was spent darning your socks. And even though you live in this house under this roof, you are a ghost. Present but unseen. Necessary but never noticed. But still. There are moments. You walk through the great hall at dusk, carrying a basket of linen. And for a second the light hits the stained glass just right. Colour spills across the floor, crimson, gold, indigo. And you stand there transfixed, like you've stepped inside a painting. No one sees you. No one would think to ask what you're doing there. But in that moment, you're not a servant. You're just a girl bathed in glass light. Watching dust motes float like snow, you shake yourself out of it and continue on. Let's drop a fact for you. In real Edwardian households, the divide between above stairs and below stairs was total. Servants were expected to remain invisible, entering rooms only when summoned, speaking only when spoken to, and never under any circumstances offering personal opinions or emotions. If you smiled too much, it was flirtation. If you frowned, it was insolence. Best to keep your face blank and your footsteps soft. And here's your fringe fact. There really were manuals written for the ideal servant, with chapters on how to bow properly, how to fold napkins with appropriate modesty, and how to walk without making your hips sway. Some even advised against having too cheerful a disposition, lest it distract the household. Now the debate. Some critics argue that modern portrayals of Edwardian service, like the ones found in television dramas, romanticise a brutal class system, erasing the hardship in favour of soft lighting and romance plots. Others claim those stories open a door, however flawed, to remembering a world that history books often forget. Is it better to tell a prettier version, or to sit in the dark with the truth? You're walking down the main hallway now, tray in hand, and you see the same parlour maid, Lucy, that's her name, fiddling with the dining room doors. She's got that look in her eye. The one you had your first week here, that mixture of fear, excitement and mild nausea. You pause beside her and murmur, "Watch your left foot, door sticks." She nods, grateful, and adjusts her stance. You carry on. There are no camera crews here, no costume department, no dramatic music swelling as you open a heavy oak door, just the weight of porcelain, the clink of silver, and the ever-present whisper of expectation. You serve the luncheon plates with practiced ease. Roast beef, creamed onions, Yorkshire pudding, everything is symmetrical, everything is hot. You move behind Lady Honoria like a shadow. She doesn't acknowledge you, but she doesn't scowl either, which counts as high praise. You note that she left half her pudding. You'll mention it to cook later, quietly, respectfully, so it doesn't happen again. You clear the plates as swiftly as you served them, pivoting on soft heels, navigating around the footmen like you're all part of a well-rehearsed ballet. No one applauds. The moment the last guest leaves the table, you begin wiping down the cloth with a stiff linen napkin, smoothing out the creases like they're secrets. Your stomach is still empty, but there's no time for that. Dinner prep has already begun, and you're needed in the still room. Something about a misplaced wine goblet and a furious under-butler. You don't ask questions, you just go. The still room is tucked away like a guilty secret. A narrow chamber off the main kitchen, with its own sink, its own shelves, and its own chill. It's where delicate things happen, where jellies are coaxed into trembling perfection, where sauces are whispered into a shape, and where glassware is cleaned so thoroughly lit you can see your anxieties reflected in it. And today, it's where you're headed. Said, because someone, not you, misplaced a wine goblet and the under-butler is spiralling. When you arrive, he's already pacing. Tall, thin, pinched like a squeezed lemon, Mr. Hensley is the kind of man who treats every minor inconvenience as an act of war. "Where is the burgundy glass?" he snaps, not looking at you, as if your mere presence is a personal affront. You don't flinch. You're used to this. "Bottom shelf of the high cupboard, sir," you say calmly. "It was moved for the polish rotation." He freezes, then turns, then nods, barely. "See that it's returned. And tell the footman not to touch the crystal again unless supervised." You nod, lower your gaze, and go to retrieve the glass. It's still where you left it, nestled behind the decanters, spotless. You carry it like it's spun sugar, set it gently on the tray, and resist the urge to mutter anything unwise. Mr. Hensley is watching you, arms folded like a disappointed schoolmaster. And yet you don't mind him, not really, because you understand the pressure. In this house, the butler is more than a man in a fine waistcoat. He's the quiet ruler of everything below stairs. His voice doesn't rise, he doesn't throw tantrums or break things. Instead, he documents, he observes. He curates the flow of invisible labour so that upstairs, the gentry never see the strain. If something goes wrong, it's his head first, and then yours. After all, service is theatre. The butler is the director. And you're the crew. Once the glass is placed properly, Mr. Hensley gives a curt nod of dismissal and vanishes down the corridor. You let out a breath you didn't realise you'd been holding. Your hands are shaking slightly. It's not fear exactly, it's the exhaustion of always being braced for scolding. You rub your palms on your apron and return to polishing the rest of the glassware. Luncheon is over. Dinner is coming, and dinner is no small thing. In the hierarchy of Edwardian meals, dinner is king. It's when the household really performs its wealth. 7 courses, sometimes more, wine pairings, finger bowls, music from the drawing room floating through the hall. And the butler? He orchestrates it like a quiet general, pacing just behind each footman, checking plates, ensuring no one makes a sound louder than a sigh. You've watched him do it 100 times. The fascinating thing is that the butler doesn't actually serve. That's for the footman. He watches, supervises, times each course with uncanny precision. He knows every bottle in the wine cellar, every fault line in the silver, every guest's favourite dish and secret allergy. He's the highest ranked servant in the house, and yet his greatest skill is making sure no one ever notices him. The footmen, meanwhile, are expected to look good and move silently. They stand behind chairs with perfect posture and polished boots, hands folded behind their backs, and serve from the left. Always the left, day. You once asked why, and the answer was simply, it's tradition. You didn't ask again. There are perks to being a footman, of course. They earn more. They often get tipped. They get measured for liveries, those smart uniforms with gleaming buttons and spotless gloves. They're considered part of the visual appeal of the household, which is a fancy way of saying they're chosen, for looks as much as skill. Sometimes the younger maids joke about it. quietly when no one else is around. But the butler, no jokes, no familiarity, no one flirts with the butler. He is untouchable, both respected and feared, like a grandfather clock that might scold you for ticking too loudly. Here's your historical fact. In Edwardian homes, the butler was often the most senior male servant and held almost complete authority over the other staff. He was responsible for managing the wine cellar, overseeing the male servants, and serving at the most formal meals. His word carried significant weight, and a good butler could make or break a household's reputation. Your fringe fact? Some butlers were known to keep diaries, private records of household happenings, scandalous rumours, or guest misbehaviours. These weren't just idle gossip logs, they could be insurance. If things went wrong, a well-documented notebook could protect a butler's position, or ensure a graceful exit with references intact. And now the scholarly debate. Was the butler a symbol of working-class power or a cautionary tale? Some argue that butlers held real influence, often earning better wages and wielding soft control over their employers through subtle manipulation. Others claim they were just as trapped by the class system as anyone else below stairs, forced into perfect obedience, lonely at the top, and required to maintain a dignity that wasn't always returned. You polish the last glass and carefully replace it on the shelf. The kitchen bells ring again, cook barking orders for dinner prep. You'll be needed to help carry the trays, serve the sauces, maybe even pass behind the footmen and correct any mistakes before the butler notices. As you leave the still room, you see Mr. Hensley pass by again. He doesn't look at you, but he adjusts his cufflinks sharply and straightens a crooked painting on the corridor wall. It's all part of the illusion. The machine must hum, the plates must shine, the family must glide through the evening unbothered by the moving parts beneath them. And you vanish back into the noise and heat of the kitchen. Because dinner is coming, and dinner is war. Dinner service begins long before the first spoon clinks. You're still below stairs, your apron already flecked with flour and something that might be clarified butter, when the butler begins his rounds. He's not stomping, not speaking loudly. No one in this house ever needs to raise their voice to make it heard. He simply appears, a quiet shadow in polished shoes, inspecting every moving piece before it's carried to the white linen stage upstairs. You're in the kitchen, folding napkins, not the basic triangle fold, but the kind with two peaks and a crisp crease that lets them stand upright like linen cat ears. There's a stack of 20. You're on number 7. You refold it twice before it's just right. It's got to match the rest. Uniformity is a language in this house, spoken without a word. And tonight, with 2 dinner guests and 1 possibly titled stranger, the standard is perfection squared. Cook is at the stove, spoon in one hand, expression thunderous. The footman beside you, Alfred, is polishing wine goblets so hard it looks like he's trying to erase time. The kitchen is hot, not just from the ovens, but from anticipation. Everyone's posture is straighter. The scullery maid's hair is pinned tighter. Even the smell of the kitchen, roast duck with orange glaze, minted peas, trifle waiting in the cold pantry, feels sharper tonight, like the food knows it's part of something larger. At exactly 600, the service bell rings 3 times. That's not an emergency. That's the beginning. You move like you've been shot from a cannon, not running, never running, but gliding fast, through the back corridor to the dining room entrance. You don't go through the front. That's for guests. You come in through the narrow side door, tray in hand, breath even. The butler is already inside. He checks the candles, adjusts the table centerpiece, and wipes an invisible smudge from the silver water jug. The dining room itself is a shrine to excess. 12 chairs around a table meant for 10, with more forks than any one person could possibly require. You help position the cutlery, spacing everything just so. 1 inch from the edge, aligned to the plate like a map for someone important. The napkins you folded earlier are placed upright, a tiny army of good manners. When the guests arrive, 2 ladies and 1 gentleman, all smelling faintly of leather gloves and brandy, they make a point of not seeing you. That's part of the magic too. You open the door just wide enough, allow the footman to pull out the chairs, and then vanish again. Not even a full step into the room. 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Ghost protocol. Dinner begins with seeing soup. It's always soup. You carry the tureen carefully, wrists aching from the heat of the handles through your cloths. The butler lifts the ladle, pours the first servings, and gives a nearly imperceptible nod. That's your cue. You collect the empty plates from the sideboard, slide behind the guests, and set them down with silent precision. Left side, always. There's a rhythm to it. Ladle, place, retreat. Ladle, place, retreat. You start breathing in time with the movements, finding some strange calm in the ritual. You don't listen to what they're saying, you can't. It's safer not to. If you laugh at the wrong moment or flinch at the mention of a name you recognise, you might as well pack your trunk. 1 course down, 6 to go. Next comes the fish, and then the meat, each with its own sauce and set of serving rules. You've memorised all of them. Who gets what, how to present the asparagus without letting it roll, when to remove the finger bowls, why you never pass the salt directly from hand to hand, always via the table. The superstitions alone could fill a handbook. The butler watches everything. You can feel his eyes on the back of your neck as you lean to adjust Lady Honoria's knife, which has mysteriously rotated 4 degrees to the left. You suspect she did it on purpose. She likes to test you. And then, somewhere between the roast and the syllabub, you hear it. Laughter, real effortless laughter. One of the guests says something about a bishop and a billiards table, and the room erupts. You feel it like a shockwave, warm, light, almost human. No one looks at you. Of course not. But for a second or the sound fills the room so fully that even you can taste it. The way it cuts through the starch and silver. The way it reminds you what the house is pretending to be. Lively, joyous, full of connection. Then it's gone. You clear the dessert plates as the men retire to the drawing room for port and cigars, while the ladies stay behind for a moment more, dabbing corners of their mouths with lace napkins and making comments you're not meant to hear. Something about Paris. Something about a new lady's maid who wore her hair down in the servants' hall. The scandal. Back in the kitchen, cook sighs and leans on the counter like she's just finished a marathon. Alfred is sweating through his livery, and Lottie's asleep on her feet in the scullery, leaning against a pile of pans she hasn't yet scrubbed. No one says it, but you all feel it. Dinner is done. The show is over. Here's your historical fact. A formal Edwardian dinner often had 7 or more courses and could last several hours. Each dish required exact timing, specific utensils, and an unspoken code of service that made even a small mistake feel like a disaster. Fringe fact? There was such a thing as a service spoon ballet, where the movement of spoons and dishes had to be synchronised across all servants. Some were even trained with metronomes behind the scenes to maintain timing. It was less dinner, more choreography, and the debate. Some historians suggest this kind of dinner service was the ultimate expression of Edwardian class anxiety. Hosts competed to outdo one another in elegance, precision, and formality, using their staff like performance props. Others argue it was simply tradition, an evolved form of hospitality rooted in ancient rituals. As for you, you don't think about it in those terms. You think about how your legs ache, how your hands sting from the scalding tureen, how your apron smells faintly of duck fat and anxiety. You lean against the wall for a moment in the corridor, eyes closed, breathing through your nose. Then the bell rings again. Drawing room, tea service. You don't sigh, you don't complain, you move. The tea tray is already half prepared when you reach the still room, porcelain cups arranged in a neat row, each saucer paired like a dance partner. A small bowl of sugar cubes sits beside silver tongs that no one but you will touch, and the cream jug is polished so bright you can see the flickering kitchen gaslight ripple across its surface. The tea itself is still steeping in its pot, wrapped in a padded cosy like a sleeping baby. This isn't ordinary tea, it's the post-dinner drawing room sort. The kind that follows port and gossip and requires just as much finesse. You carry the tray like it weighs nothing, even though your arms ache from carrying tureens and your shoulders still remember the soup service. The porcelain clinks softly with each step as you move through the corridor, past the great staircase, never up the great staircase of course, and toward the drawing room's side entrance. Always the side, never the front. The room is warm, fire crackling low in the grate, oil lamps casting a golden hue over the walls. The men have rejoined the ladies, the scent of cigar smoke clinging faintly to their jackets even though they've left their drinks in the library. They're arranged like a painting, one lady reclined near the hearth, another perched upright on a brocade chair, one man with a monocle inspecting a book he clearly isn't reading. Conversation has grown lazy, slurred slightly by wine and a long meal. This is where you must be your quietest, your stillest, your most invisible self. You cross the room, placing the tray on the sideboard with a careful nod to the butler, who stands near the door like a silent gargoyle in black. Then you begin the process. Milk first or after, jus or none. Some households have preferences written down like ritual incantations. In this one, you've simply memorised them. Lady Honoria wants Darjeeling with cream, 1 cube, no lemon. Miss Victoria prefers Earl Grey, no sugar, always a wafer biscuit. The gentleman, whatever's poured so long as it's hot. The teacups are delicate blue and white porcelain with a gold rim so fine it almost disappears in the lamplight. You pour slowly, precisely. One hand on the pot, one steadying the cup. No drips, no splashes, no noise. As you pass the cups around, you notice little things. The way Lord Halberton smiles only with his lips. The way Lady Honoria's gloved finger taps twice on the armrest when she's irritated. The way Miss Victoria tries to smile at the guest but keeps glancing at the window like she'd rather be anywhere else. You file it all away without meaning to. It's second nature now, reading moods like weather patterns. No one teaches you this part of service, but it's the part that keeps you safe. The tray is lighter now. You carry the empty pot back toward the still room, where Lottie is yawning into her sleeve and the scullery is stacked high with the aftermath of dinner. You want to help her. You should help her. But your legs feel like they belong to someone else and your wrists are starting to pulse in time with your heartbeat. The bell rings again, not the drawing room this time, the nursery. You blink. That's unusual. The children are supposed to be asleep by now, upstairs in their cocoon of toys and embroidered sheets. But the bell insists, and so you go. The nursery stairs are narrow and steep, hidden behind a false panel near the rear hallway. They smell of chalk and stale milk. At the top, the nanny meets you with a harried look and a whisper. Little Thomas is crying again. Dreams. You nod, already stepping into the dim room, where the glow of a single candle casts tall shadows on the wallpaper, circus animals dancing in flickering silhouettes. The child is red-faced and sniffling, his hair matted with sweat. You kneel beside the bed and smooth the sheet, humming something low and tuneless. One of the old lullabies. It doesn't matter which. All lullabies are spells anyway, half magic and half pity. He sniffles, curls back into his blanket, and mutters something about a lion. You nod like you understand, you don't. Here's your historical fact. Edwardian households of a certain class often had multiple evening tea rituals. The one in the drawing room was formal, usually served by the butler or parlourmaid, while the nursery had its own tea service, earlier, lighter, with milk toast and soft biscuits for the children. These routines were deeply embedded into the rhythms of the house. Fringe fact for the evening, some wealthy families required servants to memorise up to 50 different tea preferences for regular guests, including exact brands, steeping times, milk first or milk last, and preferred biscuit pairings. Servants were expected to retain this information without ever needing to ask, and the debate. Historians continue to question the emotional impact of this kind of memory labour. Was it a point of pride, a mastery of service craft, or was it a form of psychological suppression, training people to value correctness over their own thoughts, to treat guests' sugar preferences as more important than their own names? You return downstairs, the hum of the house now muted but no less tense. It's past 10. The guests are still upstairs. The dishes still piled high, the crumbs still being chased by candlelight in the dining room. You wipe your hands on your apron, and for a moment, just a moment, you lean against the pantry door and let your eyes close. The kitchen is quieter now, not still, never still, but quieter. Cook has vanished for the evening, her notes for breakfast pinned to the cutting board with a knife. Alfred is wiping down the last of the glasses, moving slower now. Lottie is nowhere to be seen, likely finally given permission to sleep. You envy her. Your day is winding down, but not over. There are boots to collect and polish for morning. There are hand towels to replace. There is the still room to clean. And soon, once the last bell rings, you will creep back to your cot, pull your thin blanket up to your chin, and drift into a sleep so deep it feels like falling through a trapdoor, only to wake again in 5 hours, before the sun, before the world stirs, before you, because tea waits for no one. Even when the house is quiet, it isn't. It rests, maybe, like a dozing animal that might twitch awake if you breathe too loudly, but it never truly sleeps. After the final teacup is washed and stacked, and the last ember in the drawing room fire has sighed out, the house settles into its next rhythm, the night shift. This is when the real absurdities begin, not in the sense of chaos, but in that strange, quiet theatre that it plays out when only a handful of people remain awake to witness the rituals of the upper class. Tonight, you're asked to bring up a hot water bottle to Lady Honoria's room. Her footman would normally handle it, but he's twisted an ankle on the back stairs and is sitting in the pantry with a damp cloth pressed to his sock. You don't ask how it happened. You don't want to know, so you fill the rubber bottle with water just shy of boiling, hot enough to retain heat through the night, but not so hot it might burst and scald her silk sheets. You wrap it in a soft flannel on the cover, the one monogrammed with her initials, and tie it with a ribbon you ironed earlier that day. Then you carry it upstairs like it's made of glass. The house is a maze at night. The usual corners feel deeper. The walls creak differently, the gaslights burn low, hissing in time with your heartbeat. You take the servant's route, never the main staircase, and knock once at her bedroom door. She doesn't answer. You enter anyway. That's the protocol. Her bedroom is half lit, filled with the smell of lavender oil and the faint sourness of powder. She's in bed, turned toward the wall, the covers pulled high. You slip the bottle beneath the quilt at her feet. She says nothing, but just as you're leaving, she murmurs, "Did the post come today?" You pause in the doorway. "Yes, my lady." A beat. "Nothing from Sussex?" "No, my lady." Another beat. You're not meant to say anything else. But you hear the soft exhale, disappointment, relief. It's not your business. You close the door behind you and disappear into the hallway, carrying the silence with you like another tray. You pass the guest wing next, where the stranger, Sir Edwin or Edmund, you can't remember, was put up after dinner. He requested fresh towels before midnight. It's 11:42, you're nothing if not punctual. But just as you place the towel bundle on the side table in his room, you catch a glimpse of something odd. He's left his shoes in the hall, polished, untouched, perfect. No servant does that, because no servant ever leaves shoes out unless they expect them to be cleaned and returned before dawn. It's a subtle command: I am here, I require you, serve me even while I sleep. You pick up the shoes, fine Italian leather, barely worn. You cradle them like you've cradled dozens of shoes before, shoes that tell you more about a person than their face ever does. These are new, decorative, expensive enough to mean something, but not well loved enough to mean much. You wonder, vaguely, who he is, what he does, if he looked you in the eye at dinner or only stared at the soup, and then you carry the shoes to the boot room and begin the process. Brush, polish, buff. Not too much shine, just enough to suggest effort, not vanity. By the time you're done, it's well past midnight. This is the absurd part of the job. You're polishing another man's identity, a stranger's, someone who will wear these shoes in the morning and never once think of your fingers, raw from laces and polish that made them gleam. Here's your historical fact. In Edwardian households, guests often left shoes outside their doors to be cleaned overnight. It was a custom brought from Victorian traditions, and by this time it was part of expected hospitality. Servants were trained to identify shoe types, materials, and proper polishing techniques without ever asking. Your fringe fact? Some high society guests were known to test new houses by intentionally scuffing their shoes before bed to see how well the staff cleaned them. A small, silent test of the household's standard. Now the scholarly debate. Did guests view servants as people, or as extensions of the house itself? Diaries from the period suggest a mix. Some guests acknowledged staff by name and left generous tips. Others never said a word, speaking about the servants as though they were chairs. The line between personhood and service was often drawn with wealth's invisible ink. You return the shoes, quietly. You arrange them exactly where they were, toes pointing slightly inward, just like before. You straighten the towel bundle again and close the guest room door behind you. The corridor's empty now. The candles flicker low. You should sleep. You want to sleep, but there are still uniforms to press for tomorrow. A tray to prepare for Miss Victoria's early breakfast. Water glasses to be topped off in the blue room. Someone might ring again. They always do. Downstairs, the scullery is empty except for a single dripping tap and a pile of pots no one will touch until dawn. You lean against the pantry wall for a moment, eyes fluttering closed, just until the next thing calls your name. You're not tired. You're beyond tired. There's a fine line between exhaustion and dissociation, and you're walking it barefoot. But you're also one of the lucky ones. You still have your place, your bunk, your references, your quiet, invisible rhythm. As you drift back down the servants' corridor, you think again of the guests' laughter, of Lady Honoria's voice in the dark. of the shoes you polished that will never step where you sleep. And still you keep moving, because in this house stillness is disobedience, and silence is everything. The servants' hall is quiet now, but not quite still. There's a kind of leftover hum, like the echo of a bell long after it stopped ringing. You step inside and feel the warmth from the fire in the small hearth, still glowing low, still trying to convince itself it matters. Chairs are half pushed in. A crust of bread has been left on one of the plates. Someone's teacup, probably Maggie's, still has a faint pink lipstick print on the rim. This is the only room in the entire house that belongs to you. Not you personally, of course, but to your kind, the servants, the invisible machine behind the curtain. It's where you eat. Where you take your 15 minutes of rest, if you've earned them, and where, on rare occasions like this one, you can just sit and exist. You take your seat, the same one every day. Seats in the servants' hall are sacred, not labelled, not assigned on any chart, but absolutely fixed in a way no guest dining room could ever be. The butler sits at the head, the housekeeper to his right, the under-butler, the first footman, the lady's maid, the senior staff, all ranked and placed. Then comes the rest of you, kitchen maids, housemaids, scullery, your 3 seats from the fireplace facing the hallway door, always within earshot of a bell. The chair is hard and the wood worn smooth from countless backs just like yours. You lean into it anyway, because right now anything not requiring your legs is a blessing. Alfred strolls in, undoing the top button of his livery and letting out a sigh he wouldn't dare make upstairs. Lord Halberton told the butler his pudding was too dense, he mutters, dropping into his seat like a sack of flour. Pudding, too dense. You smirk but don't speak. You've learnt that most complaints about food aren't about the food, they're about control. If the pudding was too soft, it would have been disrespectful. If it was too sweet, it would have been childish. If it had been perfect, still wrong, because the pudding, like you, is never the point. A few more shuffle in. Maggie, Lottie, with dark circles under her eyes, cook's assistant Nora, her hand still red from hot water and flour. The butler won't be joining tonight. He never sits unless it's early enough for no one to notice. He doesn't eat in front of the junior staff unless protocol demands it. The housekeeper, Mrs. Fenley, enters, nods briefly at the room, then picks up a biscuit and disappears back into her office. What's left is just the rest of you, what the upper floors might call the help, gathered for a late evening supper of soup that tastes vaguely of cabbage, bread that's more crust than anything else, and tea so dark it could pass for coffee if you squint. No one complains, that's part of the deal. You don't work here for the food, you talk quietly, gossip mostly. It's the currency of the hall, the only thing you get for free. Someone heard Miss Victoria crying in the music room. Someone else saw a letter addressed to Sussex crumpled in the waste bin. The visiting gentleman left a 10-shilling tip on his tray, a fortune if it makes it to the right hands, and there's a rumour, whispered, not confirmed, that the upstairs nursery is being readied for a guest child. No one knows whose, but underneath the chatter is something else. A low current of fatigue, not just physical, something bone deep, like you're all leaning against the same invisible wall, holding it up together. If one of you slips, the whole thing might tumble. Here's your historical fact. The servants' hall was a crucial part of Edwardian domestic life. It served not only as a dining room for the staff, but also as an informal courtroom, classroom, gossip mill and sanctuary. Its customs were just as rigid as the ones upstairs, sometimes even more so. Fringe fact? Some households kept house diaries where minor infractions were recorded, not in official books, but in a log kept in the servants' hall. Maids would quietly check it to see who'd been late, who'd broken a dish, who was on thin ice. In some homes, even the butler didn't know about them. And the debate? Some historians argue that the servants' hall was a space of quiet resistance, where lower-ranked staff formed bonds, whispered plans, and supported each other in small subversive ways. Others say it only reinforced the internal hierarchy of service, pitting maid against maid and creating a self-policing culture designed to serve the house, not each other. Back in your chair, the warmth from the hearth fades just slightly. Maggie has nodded off, her chin tucked into her collar. Alfred mutters something about shoe polish and slips away to the boot room. One by one they vanish. There's no signal, no bell, just that collective awareness. The day is never over, it just softens. You take your plate to the scullery and rinse it yourself. The water's lukewarm now, the basin is greasy. You clean it anyway. No one thanks you, but no one complains either. You pass the housekeeper's office. Her door is ajar, papers stacked like tiny soldiers on her desk, spectacles perched on the bridge of her nose. She doesn't look up as you pass. You're glad. You're not sure what you'd say if she did. Finally, you return to your cot in the attic room. Not quite sleep, not yet. But rest, a small mercy. Your boots come off with a groan. Your corset is looser now, hanging from a nail. Your apron is folded neatly, because even exhaustion must look tidy. Outside, the wind picks up. You can hear it tapping at the small window beside your bed. The kind of wind that makes the whole house shift slightly, as though it's exhaling. You lie down, blanket to chin, and for a moment, just one, you allow yourself to imagine what it would be like to be the one ringing the bell. Somewhere deep in the walls of the house, a clock chimes 3. Not a loud, dramatic clang, just a gentle, faraway ding that vibrates through the floorboards like a memory. You stir, eyes opening in the dark, and for a moment you don't remember where you are. Then the ache in your legs reminds you. You're in the attic room in the servants' wing on a narrow cot that creaks every time you roll your shoulder. It's still the middle of the night. You're still on duty, technically. You're always on duty. But something has pulled you from sleep. Not a bell, not a call. Something softer. You slip out of bed, careful not to wake the others. Maggie is snoring softly 2 cots down, one foot poking out from her threadbare blanket. You wrap your shawl tight around your shoulders and step into the narrow hallway, lit only by moonlight. It's quiet in a way that feels fragile, like the house has forgotten you're all here and is dreaming something entirely different. You pass the linen closet, the airing cupboard, the broom cupboard with its handle sticking out like an elbow, and you descend the back stairs in bare feet, one step at a time. You're not sure why you're walking, you're not expected anywhere, but sometimes your body just needs to move. And maybe, though you'd never admit it out loud, you're hoping to see him. John, the second footman. You've never said much to each other. A few polite nods, the occasional exchange of a sugar cube when Cook wasn't looking. But there's something in the way he holds doors for you. Not like he's meant to, like he wants to. You've caught him looking once or twice, not boldly, but sideways, when he thought you were too busy folding napkins to notice. You turn the corner into the butler's pantry and stop. There he is, leaning against the counter, half in shadow, coat unbuttoned, hair slightly mussed. There's a mug of tea in his hand and a tired half smile on his face, like he knew you'd find your way here eventually. "I thought it might be you," he says quietly. You don't say anything at first, just stand there, letting the warmth from the stove wrap around your toes. "You couldn't sleep either," he adds. You shake your head. "The house, it hums." He nods as if that makes perfect sense. He gestures toward the teapot. "There's still some left if you want." You hesitate, then nod. He pours you a mug, and you sip it slowly. It's strong, black, slightly bitter. The kind of tea you drink not for taste, but because it anchors you to something. The two of you sit in silence, side by side on the wooden bench, elbows almost touching. This isn't allowed. Not technically. Servants are discouraged from lingering together, especially at night. Especially across ranks. The housekeeper says it breeds familiarity, as if that's a disease. As if liking someone, even quietly, even with your whole heart pressed into the seams of your apron, is somehow dangerous. And maybe it is. He turns to you, voice soft. "I heard you got scolded for the towel bundle." You raise your eyebrows. "How did you hear that?" "I listen," he says, and you can't help the smile that breaks across your face. The silence that follows isn't awkward. It's full, like something has bloomed in the tiny space between you. Here's your historical fact. Romantic relationships between servants were often forbidden or heavily discouraged in Edwardian households, especially if they disrupted the hierarchy. Marriage typically meant dismissal, particularly for female servants, who were expected to leave service entirely upon becoming wives. Fringe fact. Some houses actually had written rules banning walking out, the practice of courting or strolling together on a servant's day off. If discovered, couples could be separated, or one might be transferred or dismissed. But still, romances bloomed in linen closets, back stairwells, and pantry benches just like this. And the debate, historians are divided on whether the rigid rules against servant relationships were meant to maintain discipline, or simply to avoid the inconvenience of emotional entanglements in a workplace designed to run like a machine. Some argue that romantic bonds among staff created solidarity and resistance. Others say they added to the strain, forcing workers to choose between love and livelihood. You take another sip of tea, not looking at him, but aware of every inch between you, the way his sleeve brushes yours, the way your knees almost touch. He says nothing more. Neither do you, because it isn't safe to say what's swirling just beneath the surface. Not here, not now. Eventually, you both rise, setting your mugs in the wash basin. You should sleep, he says. Tomorrow will be long. You nod. Aren't they all? He smiles again, that same tired one, and for a moment you want to ask him something. Anything. If he ever thinks about leaving. If he dreams of a world where you could walk down the street beside him and not worry about who might see. If he knows your middle name. But instead you say, "Good night." He bows his head. "Good night." You return to your cot quietly, moonlight still laced across the attic floor. Maggie hasn't moved. Lottie murmurs something in her sleep. You curl beneath your blanket, still wrapped in the echo of his voice, the weight of the warm mug in your hands. You'll forget this moment tomorrow, at least outwardly. You'll pass each other in the hallway like you always do. Professional. Silent, harmless, but tonight you remember, and for now that's enough. You wake to the sound of footsteps, not the stomping kind, no one stomps in a house like this, but the clipped, precise echo of someone walking with purpose and just a little too loudly for this early hour. You know that sound. It's the housekeeper. She's making her rounds. That means it's barely 5 and you're already late. You sit up too fast and your spine protests immediately. The air is cold, bone cold, and your blanket, as always, has slipped halfway down the cot during the night. Your breath clouds the air, and somewhere beneath the floorboards, a pipe groans, waking with you. You pull on your stockings, stiff with yesterday's sweat, and fumble for your shoes. One is under the bed, the other's halfway beneath Maggie's cot. You pull it free, hoping she doesn't wake. No such luck. She groans, eyes still closed. "Already?" "Already," you mutter, jamming your foot into the boot and standing half-dressed, half-dreaming. There's no such thing as a sick day. Not here, not now. If your head is pounding, or your stomach churning, or your knees swollen from a week's worth of stairs, it doesn't matter. You keep moving. The house depends on you the same way a clock depends on each gear, no matter how worn. If you stop, something breaks. You know this. Everyone does. Lottie learned it the hard way 2 months ago. A fever took hold, and instead of resting, she pushed through, cleaned the boot room in a sweat, ironed a stack of napkins with trembling hands. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and didn't care. 2 days later, she collapsed in the still room and was carted off by her aunt. She hasn't returned. No one talks about it. They never do. You're not sick, not yet. But something in your throat feels heavy. You make your way to the scullery, where the sink is already half full with last night's pans. They weren't cleaned properly. Someone must have rushed. You dip your hands into the greasy water, wincing as the heat seeps into your cold fingers. You scrub without thought. Your mind has detached, floating above the noise of clanking pans and dripping taps. Your eyes are gritty, your joints ache, but you scrub. In the kitchen, cook is already barking. "Where's the pudding cloth, and who moved my flour tin?" You wince. You didn't move the flour tin. But if no one claims it, she'll pick the closest body to punish. You keep your head down. You blend in. Once the pans are done, you gather a tray for Miss Victoria's room, toast with marmalade, a single boiled egg, a slice of cold ham, and a small pot of breakfast tea. She wakes early on Fridays. You've learned that the hard way. Once you were late, and she told her mother. You spent the next 2 days cleaning the window panes on the 3rd floor while the housekeeper sighed dramatically every time she passed you. You carry the tray up the back stairs. One step at a time, quietly. You can feel the tremble in your arm from the weight, but you ignore it. When you reach her door, you knock once and wait. There's a beat, then her voice, soft, bored, slightly nasal. "Come." She's still in bed, curtains drawn, hair unbrushed. A novel is open in her lap, though you doubt she's read a word. You set the tray on her side table, curtsy slightly, and wait to see if she'll say anything else. She doesn't. You step back ready to disappear. "Wait." You pause. She points to the window. "Open it. It's the stuffy." You obey, sliding the sash open with careful fingers. The morning air is sharp and wet, and you feel it slice through your blouse like it has opinions. She doesn't thank you. You curtsy again and leave. Here's your historical fact. Edwardian servants had virtually no access to sick leave. Unless a servant was gravely ill, or wealthy enough to bribe their way into favour, they were expected to perform their duties regardless of health. Many worked through flu, infections, and even injuries, fearing dismissal or the loss of a precious reference. Fringe fact, some households kept sick rooms not for the staff's comfort, but to quarantine them away from the family in case of illness. These rooms were often barely furnished and cold, a clear message that sickness was an inconvenience, not a concern, and the debate. Scholars disagree on whether the refusal to acknowledge servants' health was a product of cruelty or simply indifference. Some argue that the upper class truly believed the lower class was physically hardier, somehow built to withstand conditions that would cripple a lady or gentleman. Others say it was just willful blindness, an unwillingness to face the cost of their own comfort. You descend the stairs again, hands aching from the cold window pane. Someone in the hall is coughing. Dry, sharp, it echoes. You don't ask who it is. You don't want to know. In the laundry room, steam is already curling from the basins. You're assigned ironing today. You take your place beside the press. The heavy metal iron already heating over the stove. You test it with a flick of water. It sizzles. The first shirt is white, stiff, high-collared. You smooth it across the board, grip the iron and press. You do this again and again and again. The burn on your wrist is from 2 weeks ago. But it flares as if to remind you it's still healing. You ignore it. Later, when the footmen file in to collect their starched collars and you hand them over one by one, they barely look at you. They just nod or don't. You don't mind? Not really. You're used to being unseen. But today, as John collects his collar, he glances up, just briefly, and his eyes flicker, not with pity, something else. Maybe worry, maybe warning. You don't speak, but it lingers, and the iron hisses in the silence. The scullery is the part of the house that everyone pretends doesn't exist. Guests never hear about it. The family never visits. Even most of the upper staff avoid it when they can. But you know it like the lines on your palms. And today, you've been assigned to it. Not for an hour, not as a side task. The whole day. There's something especially brutal about scullery work, even by Edwardian standards. It's not the labour, though the labour is terrible. It's not even the isolation, though you could go an entire shift without seeing another soul except the cook barking orders. It's the fact that everything here is wet, not just damp. Wet. The walls drip from steam. The stone floors sweat under your boots. The dishes, constant, endless, are washed in hot water that turns your fingers red, then white, then numb. You wear an apron over your apron, and still your petticoat is soaked through by mid-morning. If heaven exists, you're fairly sure it does not involve potatoes mashed into the creases of your shoes. It starts with breakfast cleanup. Dozens of plates stacked on one another, egg yolk dried to concrete, bits of kipper skin clinging to forks. The smell is a mix of lard and scorched toast, and the tea leaves clog the drain like seaweed. You scrub with a brush that's losing bristles and wipe with a cloth that might once have been white back in the Crimean War. There's no time to complain. The footman will be back in minutes with another load, and then come the pans, heavy copper ones, blackened with soot and streaked with grease from the morning's fry-up. Some of them still hiss with residual heat when you dunk them into the basin. You do it anyway. The water burns, but that's better than the cold. You've learned to rotate hands, alternating between scrubbing and rinsing so your fingers don't split. You're alone in here mostly. The cook's assistant pops in now and again, either to drop off a tray or grumble about how no one respects her soufflés. She's probably right, but you're too tired to care about it. You hum softly to yourself, not a tune exactly, more a rhythm to match the scrubbing. The scullery doesn't have a clock, but you've learned to measure time in piles. The first stack of plates gets cleared before the third bell. The pudding moulds are done before lunch service. And if you're very, very lucky, you'll have the forks stacked properly before the kitchen bell rings for the dinner rush. But today isn't a lucky day. At some point after the third pile of soup bowls, you cut your finger, and not badly, just a slice across the knuckle from a jagged plate edge. It stings bright and sudden, and the blood mixes with the soap before you can stop it. You suck your finger quickly, press it with your apron, and keep going. No time to bandage, no one to tell. You wash, you rinse, you stack. The steam makes your hair stick to your forehead in damp curls. Your arms tremble from the repetition. Your wrists ache. At one point the floor gets slippery, some grease or water spilled near the drain, and you skid, barely catching yourself on the basin. You bark out a laugh, just once, just to hear a sound that isn't metal scraping metal. No one hears you. And that's the thing about the scullery. It's the heart of the house and also its grave. Everything used, dirtied, broken or forgotten ends up here. You make it whole again, invisible again. No one praises a clean plate. They only complain about a dirty one. Here's your historical fact. In Edwardian households, the scullery maid was often the lowest-ranking female servant. She worked the longest hours, performed the dirtiest jobs, and typically started her shift before anyone else, even the cook. She rarely saw the family. In some homes, she wasn't even allowed to eat with the other servants. Fringe fact? In certain households, scullery maids were forbidden from using the main servants' staircases and had their own tiny corridor, often just a ladder-like set of steps, because they were considered too dirty to mix with the rest of the staff. And the debate. Some historians argue that scullery work offered a kind of strange freedom. Yes, it was gruelling, but being out of sight meant fewer eyes watching. Others insist it was psychological punishment, the clearest expression of a rigid system that ranked people not by skill, but by their proximity to luxury. You pause for a breath, back against the cool stone wall, and realise your dress is soaked through at the hem. Again, your hands are shriveled, pruned and reddened, and your back hums with a dull ache that will stay with you long into the night. You've barely eaten, just a crust from someone's breakfast plate that hadn't been touched. The door creaks open. It's John. He doesn't come all the way in, just leans against the frame and raises an eyebrow. Still alive? You roll your eyes. Barely. He holds something out, wrapped in a napkin. You take it cautiously. It's half a roll. Warm. Buttered. You didn't get a supper, it says. Like it's no big thing. You nod, too tired to smile properly, and whisper, thanks. He vanishes again and you're left with the roll, which tastes like kindness, which might as well be roasted pheasant. You return to the sink. There's another pile waiting, knives this time, hundreds of them, all with handles that love to slip through your fingers. You scrub, and in the steam and solitude, you forget briefly that there's a whole world upstairs eating on china you just cleaned. You've been in the house long enough to know that not all the creaks come from settling wood or changing weather. Some are stories, folded tightly into the structure, hidden in the quiet moments, between bell rings, before the water boils, after the silver is polished. You don't talk about them, not directly, but you feel them, in the corners, in the cold patches of hallway where the gaslight flickers, in the stairs that seem to groan a little louder under certain footsteps. They are the stories of the ones who came before you, the ones who didn't make it. Not everyone lasts in service. That's something they don't put in the housekeeping manuals or in the polite chatter of parlour novels. You don't hear it in drawing rooms or see it in upstairs smiles. But the truth is, people disappear. Sometimes they give notice, get married, or move on to grander houses. But other times, they just vanish, and no one really asks. There was a girl, Clara, before your time. Maggie told you about her on your third day, when you'd cried behind the linen cupboard and pretended you weren't. Clara was a scullery maid. It was Lottie now, 17, maybe 18. Sweet enough, quiet. Kept her head down. One day she was there, the next gone. No goodbye. No letter. Her cot empty, her name never spoken again by the housekeeper. Maggie said she heard whispers about her being caught upstairs after hours, about something broken, something stolen, something worse. No one ever said for sure. And then there was Thomas, a valet who apparently took his job too seriously, and his master's secrets even more so. Dismissed in the middle of the night, no reference, no wages. Some say he knew too much, others say he opened the wrong drawer. One of the footmen claimed he saw him again in London, looking thinner, older, standing outside a club in the rain. That was 5 years ago, but the story that haunts you most is Elsie. She wasn't just a servant, she was a shadow stitched into the seams of the house. Parlour maid, dark eyes, quick hands, clever mouth. She'd been here 3 years before you arrived, long enough to earn her own corner seat in the servants' hall, long enough to stop flinching when the housekeeper passed. They say she once made Lady Honoria laugh by accident, and was scolded not for the joke, but for forgetting her place. Then one day Elsie changed. She was still quick, still tidy, still capable, but quieter, duller at the edges, as if something had been taken out of her and not put back. People said she'd been seen crying in the linen room, that she stopped going outside even on her half-day, that she had bruises on her wrists she claimed were from lifting a heavy bucket. One morning she didn't report for breakfast service. Her uniform was folded on her cot, her boots still damp from the day before. She was gone, and the strange thing? No one looked for her, no police, no questions, just a curt statement from the butler that she had left her post and a replacement would be arriving by week's end, as if a person could just dissolve into the bricks and plaster, as if that was just another Tuesday. Here's your historical fact. In large Edwardian households, it wasn't uncommon for servants to leave suddenly, or be dismissed with little explanation. A servant could be fired without notice or cause, often with no recourse. For women especially, a single accusation or rumour could end a career. Fringe fact, some grand homes were rumoured to be bad luck for staff. Houses where maids never lasted more than a season. Places with a history of nervous conditions or female complaints. Of course, none of it ever made it into the official records. But the reputations lingered, passed from servant to servant like whispered prayers, and the debate, some historians argue these disappearances were mostly mundane. Transfers, illnesses, marriages. Others believe something more sinister often lay beneath. Abuse, exploitation, and the kind of scandal that households paid handsomely to erase. The truth, likely both, the system wasn't built for honesty. It was built for silence. You stand in the third-floor corridor now, the one with the strange slope near the blue room. It's late. You've been sent to deliver a fresh jug of water and swap out a towel. The light here is dimmer, the floor colder, and as you pass the narrow window that overlooks the east wing, you feel it again. That prickling low hum of something just out of sight. Not ghosts exactly, more like echoes. The house remembers, even when people don't. As you place the jug on the table and fold the towel just so, your eyes drift to the mirror across the room. For a moment you think you see someone standing behind you, just a flicker, a shape, but when you turn there's nothing. Your reflection stares back, tired, pale, mouth pressed into a line that wasn't there a year ago. You adjust your cap, smooth your apron, leave the room, you never mention the mirror. Downstairs, in the servants' hall, the fire has died down. Maggie is knitting, her fingers moving more from habit than purpose. Lottie sleeps sitting up, her head against the wall. Alfred is reading an old newspaper someone left behind, flipping pages slowly, like he's trying to make it last longer. No one speaks of Clara, or Thomas, or Elsie. But when a new girl arrives next week, eyes wide and hopeful, you already know what you'll do. You'll show her which steps creak. You'll point out where the laundry room hides extra cloths. You'll tell her not to be alone in the east hallway too long after dark, not because it's haunted, but because you remember, and you'll never tell her why, not directly, but you'll make sure she listens, because the house forgets quickly, but you don't. The thing about the children upstairs is that you know them better than their own parents do. You've held them when they cried through fevers, cleaned their sick from nursery sheets, stitched buttons on their rompers, and told them stories in the quiet hush between nap time and supper. But none of that is written down anywhere. It's not remembered. You're not in their photographs. You won't be in their wedding announcements. You're the shadow at the edge of their childhood, soft and necessary, and entirely forgettable. Today you're assigned to the nursery, which is both a blessing and a curse. It's quieter than the scullery, warmer than the cold front hallway, and you're less likely to have the housekeeper breathing down your neck. But it's also a strange limbo. Half caregiver, half guilt, ghost. You're expected to tidy without being heard, soothe without being noticed, and love without leaving a trace. Miss Gwendolen, the nanny, meets you at the door with the look of someone who has lost her last ounce of patience. They've been at each other all morning, she huffs, as if the children are a pair of squabbling hens. If you can keep them occupied while I speak with the governess about their lessons, I'll be deeply grateful. That's as close to a compliment as you're going to get. You nod and step into the room. Thomas, the younger one, is sitting on the floor in a sea of wooden soldiers. His face lights up when he sees you. Will you tell the story about the coal dragon? He asks, already reaching for your hand. Arabella, the older sister, is draped across the window seat with a look of practiced boredom. That story's for babies, she mutters, not looking up from her book. He should be learning Latin. He's fair, you say gently, kneeling beside him. He'll learn plenty of Latin later. Let's have dragons while we still can. Arabella huffs, but doesn't argue. You begin the story, one you made up months ago, about a dragon who lived in a coal cellar, and only emerged when a house had forgotten how to laugh. You speak softly, Moen, your voice weaving the tale into the room like ribbon. Thomas is enraptured. Arabella pretends not to listen, but turns a page every 5 minutes, even though her book is upside down. You've always had a knack for stories. Maybe it's because you were raised on them, little half-truths and full fictions told around a cracked hearth in a town that doesn't matter. Your mother once said stories were the only thing the gentry couldn't take from you. You're beginning to think she was right. You help Thomas line up his soldiers in formation, and when he tires of that, you fix the lace on Arabella's sleeve where it started to fray. He doesn't thank you, but she does glance at you with something that might be gratitude, hidden under all that inherited pride. Later, you wipe their faces, wash their hands, and help them into their afternoon clothes, lighter muslins for inside play, boots with polished buckles, soft ribbons for hair. You do all this without comment, because this is how it goes. You raise them, they forget you. Here's your historical fact. In upper-class Edwardian homes, children were raised almost entirely by nurses and governesses. Their parents saw them at designated times, usually after tea or before bedtime, and affection was often formal, even distant. Servants, particularly nursery maids and housemaids, formed the most consistent emotional bonds with the children. Fringe fact, some adult members of the aristocracy would later describe vivid memories of their childhood nurses, including lullabies sung in local dialects, but couldn't recall the sound of their own mother's voice. The emotional imprint left by staff often lasted a lifetime, even if the names of those staff didn't. And the debate, scholars argue over the emotional labour of Edwardian servants, particularly those who cared for children. Was it a quiet act of love, or just another expected duty? Some say it gave the servants a sense of purpose, others say it was the cruelest part, forming deep maternal attachments to children who would grow up, forget them, and become their next employers. Arabella asks, after her hair is brushed, "Why don't you have children?" You blink. She's 8. "Well," you say carefully, "I suppose I've been too busy." She nods solemnly. "That's silly. You'd be good at it." You smile, but inside your chest something flickers, something soft and hollow and dangerously close to real grief. "I think you're right," you whisper, adjusting the bow in her hair. You tidy the nursery before you leave, tuck the dolls back into their cradle, fold the blankets, collect the puzzle pieces into their boxes. Thomas has fallen asleep on the rug, face pressed into the stuffed lion he carries everywhere. You lift him gently, tuck him into the daybed, and pull the sheet up to his chin. You're not his mother. He won't remember this. But still, you stand for a moment, hand on the bedpost, watching him breathe. Outside the nursery, Miss Gwendolen thanks you again. Another miracle, and you descend the stairs slowly, the weight of the afternoon pressing behind your eyes. Back in the servants' hall, the others are preparing for dinner service. Maggie is adjusting her cuffs. Alfred is shining his buttons in the flickering firelight. Cook is shouting about overcooked leeks again. Everything is the same, except you feel different. Not entirely, just a shift. Like a door opened inside you, just a crack, letting something old and private escape. You sit in your usual seat, spoon soup into your mouth, and listen as the others speak around you. But you keep thinking of Thomas's quiet breath, and Arabella's question, and the way your mother used to sing lullabies you've tried to forget. It's December now, and the house smells different. Not entirely pleasant. There's still coal smoke and boiled cabbage and polish in the air, but layered over all that is something softer. Pine, spices, wax from candles that flicker in drafty corners. It's Christmas in the household, and while that means carols upstairs and orange slices in the drawing room, it means something entirely different below stairs. The first sign of the season isn't the decorations, it's the extra work. You're summoned to the dining room before breakfast, a rare breach of routine. The butler stands at the head of the long table, gesturing to a crate full of ornaments that have been retrieved from some dusty attic vault. "Lady Honoria wants the tree up before luncheon," he says, "and she would like the drawing room to sparkle." He doesn't elaborate on what that means. You're supposed to understand it instinctively. That's how this place works. Implied expectations, invisible lines. You spend the morning up and down a ladder, draping garlands across mantles and dusting off baubles with a cloth so soft it might as well be made of air. The ornaments are old, some delicate enough to shatter if you breathe on them too hard. You suspect half were brought back from some grand tour decades ago. There's a glass icicle with a chip in its side that Lady Honoria insists must hang dead centre. You hang it, then rehang it, then shift it a quarter-inch to the left until it's finally somehow correct. The tree itself arrives in a grand display of pine needles and footmen grunting. It's too tall, of course. It always is. You saw it in the hallway earlier, still dripping from frost, towering over the entry table like an invading force. Now, in the drawing room, it scrapes the ceiling with its top branch, bending awkwardly like it knows it doesn't belong here. Still, it's yours to dress. You and Alfred spend the better part of the morning wrapping it in gold ribbon, hanging brass stars, balancing the crooked wooden angel at the very top. You work in silence mostly, sharing the occasional eye roll when Miss Victoria wanders in to supervise, then immediately wanders back out when she's bored. She leaves a trail of perfume and judgment behind her. Once the tree is finished, the housekeeper inspects it. She says nothing, which means it's perfect. And then, just when you think you've earned a moment to breathe, you're pulled into the kitchen to help prepare for the staff Christmas dinner. Not the real Christmas dinner, of course, that's tomorrow, for the family and their guests. With 12 courses and a full string quartet, this is the unofficial one, held early, squeezed between polishing silver and prepping pheasant. It's a few trays of meat pies and stewed carrots, a small bottle of claret brought up from the cellar, and a pudding with a sixpence baked inside. You're allowed to sit a little longer than usual. There's music. Alfred brought his harmonica again, and someone, possibly Maggie, has snuck a sprig of holly onto the end of the table, next to the cracked sugar bowl. Cook is in a good mood, which is both suspicious and contagious. She's made custard. Actual custard. Someone starts a carol. Off-key. But no one cares. For a little while, just a little, the rules seem looser. The hierarchy softer. You laugh, you eat. You even forget, for the span of a few bites, that you're meant to be invisible. The pudding is served steaming, and you get the sixpence. The table cheers. It's the only time in months that you've been the centre of anything. Here's your historical fact. Edwardian servants were sometimes given a small Christmas celebration of their own, typically held the day before or after the family's formal festivities. It often included modest gifts, a meal, and an afternoon off, though it varied wildly from house to house. Some staff saw nothing but extra duties and a leftover slice of pie. Fringe fact? Some butlers kept detailed logs of past staff Christmases, including who received what gifts from above stairs, which footmen cried into the punch, and how many extra servings of wine mysteriously vanished during clean-up. And the debate. Historians still argue whether Christmas in the servant class was a genuine moment of warmth or a calculated performance, an annual pressure valve that let staff blow off just enough steam to keep working. Was it gratitude, or just tradition, masquerading as kindness? After the meal, you're allowed to open your gift. It's always the same. A handkerchief embroidered with your initials, every year stitched in the same fine thread wrapped in brown paper with a card signed, likely by the housekeeper, but in Lady Honoria's name. You don't mind, it's a good handkerchief, and it's yours. Later that evening, you're in the hallway outside the drawing room when you hear it. Miss Victoria is at the piano playing Silent Night. She's not half bad, a little heavy on the sustain pedal, but her timing's decent. Lord Halberton is humming along, and Lady Honoria's voice, cold, elegant, floats over the top in a low alto. You stand in the shadows, listening. You think of your mother again, of how she used to sing that carol while darning socks, her voice worn but sweet. You wonder if anyone upstairs has ever had to darn anything. The bells are quiet tonight. Even the house seems to pause. You sneak out to the back steps for a breath of air. It's snowing. Not hard, just enough to turn the gardens into lace. Your breath steams in the air, and for a moment, the house behind you doesn't feel like a prison or a machine. Just a warm place glowing in the dark. The back door creaks open. John again. He doesn't say anything, just joins you, hands in his coat pockets, boots crunching softly in the snow. You both watch the flakes fall. No rules, no service, no pretending. Just a shared silence wide as the sky. When royalty visits, the house becomes something else entirely. It sheds its usual layers of order and familiarity, and transforms into a tightly wound stage, set, lit, and staffed for one performance only, to be seen. Every movement is rehearsed, every smile practiced, every trace of human mess scrubbed clean. The entire place hums with the nervous energy of people pretending they aren't terrified. The guest this time is a minor royal, some cousin of the Queen's second nephew's first wife. But no one says it like that. In this house, she's simply Her Highness, and you're instructed to say nothing unless spoken to, bow your head, and pretend she's made of glass. The preparations start a week in advance. A full calendar appears on the wall in the servants' hallway, handwritten by the butler, with each task assigned down to the minute. There are 2 days blocked out just for silver inspection, and 3 for guest linen preparation. The linen is not new, but it might as well be. You press it within an inch of its life, fold each sheet so perfectly it could pass for origami, and carry it upstairs like it's royal treasure. Then there's the cleaning. You thought the house was already spotless. You were wrong. Every curtain is taken down and beaten. every carpet lifted and aired. Even the books in the drawing room are dusted one by one. Not the shelves, the books. Titles you'll never read, authors you've never heard of, all carefully wiped so they don't betray a single speck of common air. You're assigned to the guest chamber where Her Highness will sleep. It's rarely used, which means it's wrapped in the kind of chill that only forgotten rooms collect. You start by airing it out, windows wide in the frost, and spend the next 2 days polishing wood, smoothing creases, and rearranging the floral display on the mantelpiece 3 separate times. The housekeeper finally settles on white roses, dignified, not flirtatious. Even the bells are retested. The butler has Alfred crawl into the walls, literally into the walls, to check the wires behind the call box, making sure the one labelled green room actually connects to the right floor. He emerges soot-streaked and irritable, and no one thanks him. It's assumed he enjoyed the privilege. On the day itself, the house is electric. The front hall is scrubbed until it gleams. You polish the brass doorknobs with such intensity that you see your own exhausted reflection, warped and golden. Cook is barking orders that no one dares question, her apron already stained with flour, ragey and possibly raspberry jam. The menu is displayed on the chalkboard: poached turbot, roasted quail, creamed asparagus, and a dessert you can't pronounce. You don't even try. Her Highness arrives late, of course. That's part of the power, being expected and delayed. The carriage pulls up to the drive while the staff stand just out of sight, lined up in perfect silence. You see her only for a moment. Fur-lined coat, perfect hat, lips painted like crushed berries. You're not allowed to meet her eyes. Dinner is a silent ballet of nerves. You're helping in the dining room, serving from the sideboard, eyes fixed on the floor. Every move is watched, every dish timed to the second. When the quail is served, you hold your breath as the butler lifts the silver dome. The plate is immaculate. The guest nods. No one breathes for another 30 seconds. Upstairs, it's all grace and ease and laughter. Downstairs, it's absolute chaos. You return to the kitchen to find 2 trays of petit four ruined, 1 dropped, 1 burnt. Cook is apoplectic. The under-kitchen maid is in tears. You help remake the final batch. Fingers moving faster than they ever have. The new batch is cooled, dusted, and carried up without fanfare. No one claps. But it doesn't come back half-eaten, and that's the closest thing to praise you'll get. Her Highness retires early. Or so the butler announces. The guest room remains pristine. You sneak in later to check the fire, adjusting the logs until the crackle sounds just right. The air smells faintly of perfume, of wealth, of something you'll never have a name for. The next morning you bring up tea to her suite. She doesn't answer the knock. You enter quietly, set the tray down. She's seated by the window, still in her robe, staring into the garden. She speaks without turning. "Do you enjoy your work here?" You freeze. It's not a question you're used to, not from anyone above stairs, not in that tone, gentle, curious, not cruel. You pause. "Yes, Your Highness," she hums. "Good answer." Then she turns back to the window, and you slip out. Here's your historical fact. Royal visits to aristocratic households were rare, but highly orchestrated events. Every detail, from the precise alignment of the cutlery to the temperature of the bathwater, was controlled to ensure perfect deference. Servants could be dismissed for the smallest misstep. Fringe fact, there are records of houses renting extra silver, chairs, and even footmen to maintain the illusion of grandeur during royal visits. In some cases, entire rooms were redecorated temporarily and returned to their former state once the guest departed. And the debate. Some historians argue these visits expose the absurd fragility of the social order, how much effort and labour it took to maintain the illusion of wealth and power. Others see it as a peak moment of national identity and pride, a glimpse of order in a rapidly changing world. Either way, it always came at someone's cost. The royal guest leaves the next day, trailing rose scent and silence. You help carry her trunks to the carriage, more bags than one person could possibly need. You never once hear her say thank you. As the wheels crunch away over gravel, the house seems to slump back into itself. The tension lifts, and the exhaustion settles in its place. You return to your duties like nothing happened. But your feet hurt more than usual. Your hands are cracked from polish, and in your pocket somehow, you've still got a single white rose. You've seen it happen. That moment when the air shifts, when someone crosses a line they didn't know was there, and everything that felt solid starts to vanish beneath their feet. You've seen it in slow motion, in the drawn face of a girl realizing she's made a mistake that can't be unsaid. And you've seen it fast, like a trapdoor opening under a footstep. One moment she's in service, the next she's gone. Today it's Nora, the assistant kitchen maid. Small, quiet, eager in the way only new staff ever are. You don't know much about her, only that she came from a town smaller than yours and has a nervous smile she tries to cover with busyness. She's barely 16, and she always forgets to tuck her apron strings properly. The offence, as far as you can gather, is soup. She burned it, or oversalted it, or dropped the ladle. There are multiple versions already swirling, each more dramatic than the last. Cook shouted, as she does, but this time she didn't stop. There were crashing pans and a slammed door. And then Nora's name was crossed off the rota, just like that, as if she were never there. You find her sitting on the back step behind the kitchen, coatless, eyes swollen, her little hands trembling in her lap. "They said I'd be dismissed with no reference," she whispers. "How am I supposed to find another post without a reference?" You sit beside her even though you should be folding napkins. "Did you really ruin the soup?" She shakes her head. "I don't think so, but I tripped and dropped a spoon, and it splashed." That's it, a splash. You want to tell her it'll be all right, that someone will speak up for her. That fairness exists somewhere, even in a place like this. But you've been here too long to lie. Here's the thing they don't tell you about life in service. It's not just the work that's hard. It's the knowing that your job can vanish for any reason, or no reason at all. The rules are written, yes. But then there are the unwritten ones, the ones you only learn by breaking them. Don't speak too much, don't speak too little. Don't look directly at a guest. Don't ignore them either. Don't appear tired. Don't look too eager. It's unbecoming. Don't refuse extra work. Don't be caught finishing too quickly. Don't smile too wide. Don't sulk. Don't cry. And above all, don't forget that you are replaceable. It's the word they don't say but everyone hears. Cook doesn't fire Nora directly. It's the butler who delivers the message, as always. He reads from a folded slip of paper, as if it's the weather report. Your services are no longer required. You'll be escorted to collect your things, wages through Friday, no letter. Then he steps away as if the conversation is already done. The housekeeper doesn't argue. She never does. Nora is gone by supper. You think about the spoon, the splash, how close you've come to making worse mistakes. And you wonder, was that the real reason? Or did someone simply decide that today was the day? Here's your historical fact. Edwardian servants had few legal protections. They could be dismissed at any time, for any cause, or none at all. References were essential for finding new work, and a single poor word from a former employer could doom a servant's entire future in service. Fringe fact: some household ledgers kept blacklists, names of dismissed staff often shared between houses. A servant marked disobedient, impertinent, or simply unsatisfactory could struggle to find employment for years. And the debate? Scholars still question whether the practice of instant dismissal was about maintaining standards or about fear. By making an example of someone, even for a minor offence, the system preserved its authority through terror. Was it about justice or control? After Nora leaves, the scullery feels different. Her apron still hangs on the hook. Her boots are still drying near the fire. You know someone will claim them by next week. Everything gets absorbed by the house eventually. Down in the servants' hall, conversation is thinner, more careful. The laughter is too quick. The silences are too long. Even Cook doesn't yell quite as loudly. Everyone is reminded all over again of the line they're standing on. You keep your head down the next day. You finish your work early but don't let anyone see. You accept an extra task without blinking. You polish the stair rods twice, just in case. You keep your voice steady, your smile soft, and your thoughts buried deep beneath the surface. But that night, in the attic room, as you pull the blanket up over your knees and try to warm your feet on the stone hot water bottle someone forgot to refill, you feel something twist. Not fear, that's always been there. Something smaller, harder, a kernel of resistance. You whisper her name once, just once, Nora. And you promise, silently, that you won't forget her, even if the house already has. The strange thing is how fast it happens. One day you're sweeping the front steps while trying not to cough too loudly, and the next someone's talking about automobiles and electric light fixtures like they aren't straight out of a Jules Verne fantasy. You blink and the world tilts, slowly, then all at once. It starts with small things. First there's a man at the door, not a guest, not a vendor, just a quiet fellow in a brown overcoat who arrives with a toolbox and a ladder. He's here to inspect the wiring. You didn't know the house had wiring. You'd assumed all light was born from gas and flickering matches, but apparently Lady Honoria wants the electricity. Not for the whole house, of course, just her dressing room and the dining room, and perhaps the front hall, for atmosphere. The man doesn't say much, but he leaves behind a trail of confusion. The housekeeper grumbles. The butler stares at the new light switch like it might explode. Cook insists she can taste it in the soup. You clean around the new fittings carefully. They buzz faintly when switched on, like they're trying to remember how fire works. Then comes the telephone, installed in a box near the front stairs, hidden behind a panelled door. The master uses it sometimes, the lady never. The servants, of course, are forbidden. You've heard it ring once, high and shrill and unlike any sound the house has made before. It was like hearing the future yawn. And then, more subtle shifts. The mistress starts reading the Times with a new tone in her voice. There's talk of suffragettes, of women in the streets, of signs and shouting and hunger strikes. It all feels far away and unreal, like something from a novel, but the staff talk about it in the kitchen when Cook's back is turned. Maggie says she knows a girl who tied herself to the gates outside Parliament. You laugh at first, then you don't. One afternoon, Miss Victoria returns from the city with her cheeks flushed and her gloves torn. Her mother snaps at her in the hallway. You hear phrases like embarrassment and reckless behaviour and "you're not one of them." Later, you find a pamphlet folded into the back of the settee, tucked between the upholstery like a secret. You don't dare read it fully, but the title sticks in your head. Votes for Women, Dignity for All. It hums in your ears for the rest of the week. Here's your historical fact. The Edwardian period was a time of massive social and technological change. Electricity, telephones and motor cars began appearing in upper-class households alongside the first waves of organised labour, women's suffrage movements, and calls for reform from the working class. Fringe fact. In some households, servants refused to use electric switches, believing them to be unsafe, or worse, unnatural. It wasn't uncommon for staff to continue lighting gas lamps in rooms already wired for electricity just to feel more proper. And the debate? Some historians view these shifts as a breaking point in the domestic service world, a slow erosion of an ancient system. Others argue that change was mostly cosmetic. The structure of service persisted for decades even after votes were won and motors hummed through the countryside. The uniform remained. The bell still rang. Downstairs, change comes slower. You still wake in the dark, still scrub the same floors, still answer the same bells, but the questions start to rise, not aloud, but inside you like slow drifting clouds. Why does the butler earn double what the maids do when he never scrubs a thing? Why does Lady Honoria host fundraisers for the poor, but pay her staff so little we steal bread when no one's looking? Why are the uniforms always black and white? Why do we still whisper? One night, John passes you in the hallway and murmurs, "You ever think of leaving?" You pretend not to hear him, but later, folding sheets in the laundry room, you wonder what you'd say if you answered. Could you? Would you? Where would you go? You've heard of girls who leave, some marry, some vanish, some end up in shops or factories. Better hours, they say, but worse pay. No room, no meals, no safety net. The world beyond these walls is wide, but also cold, and it doesn't always welcome girls with stained hands and no family name. Still, the thought is there. The world is changing, slowly, unevenly. And the house knows it too. The furniture creaks a little more. The windows rattle at night. The bells ring less often, as if even the masters are tired. There's a tension in the air, not sharp but steady, like the moments before a storm. You still press uniforms, you still clean fireplaces, but you also look longer out the windows. One afternoon, as you're dusting the upper corridor, Miss Victoria passes you without speaking. Then a few steps later, she stops. She turns. "You don't have to stay here forever, you know," she says, not quite looking at you. You blink. "Miss," she hesitates. "Nothing." A shrug. "Just, you're clever. I can tell." And then she's gone. You don't understand what she meant. Not entirely. But later, in your cot, as you trace the fold of your apron with tired fingers, you hear it again. You don't have to stay here forever. The future is coming. You can feel it in your knees, in the cracks of the walls, in the buzz of the electric light overhead. You close your eyes, and wonder what tomorrow will ask of you. There's something you don't admit, not even to yourself most days. It's the quiet thought that waits at the bottom of every teacup you wash, every hallway you sweep, every curtsy you perform. It's this: you don't want to die here. You don't want to live your entire life on the backstairs of someone else's story. You don't want to spend your best years pressing linens that will be wrinkled by dinner time, or dusting books you're not allowed to read. And you definitely don't want your future written out in rota sheets and service registers and whatever scraps of favour you can win from the lady of the house. And yet, here you are, still smoothing the seams, still checking the bells, still moving quietly enough to disappear. But lately something's changed. It started with the post. A letter addressed to no one in particular tucked into the basket with the deliveries and left, mistakenly or not, in the servants' hall. Maggie found it first. A newsletter. Unionist. A few typed pages about a meeting in town, nothing official, nothing criminal, but the sort of thing that would earn a very serious conversation if the butler saw it. She handed it to you, quietly. You tucked it into your apron, just as quietly, and read it that night by candlelight, while the others slept. It talked about hours, about wages, about rights, about dignity. It asked questions you've never heard aloud. About why you're expected to work 16 hours a day, why being born poor means you're treated as furniture, why no one seems to care if your hands bleed or your back gives out, or your whole life passes you by in someone else's basement. The next day you feel different. You still sweep the stairs, you still scrub the copper pans, but your thoughts are louder now, sharper, and you're not the only one. Alfred, of all people, brings it up, in the scullery, while drying spoons. There's a meeting this weekend, down by the foundry. I heard they're talking about organising house staff. You raise your eyebrows. That's illegal. He shrugs. So was asking for Sundays off. Till someone made noise about it. Maggie joins in. My cousin's with a household in Kensington. They've already walked out once, got their hours changed too. It feels absurd. Like a story. Like something that happens in books, not in households like this one. But here it is, spoken aloud by tired hands holding tarnished forks. You start to see the cracks everywhere now, in the way cook rubs her bad knee after long shifts, in the way the housekeeper's fingers tremble when she signs the ledger, in the way even the butler, proud, polished, sometimes stares into the fire a little too long after dinner service. You begin keeping notes, not much, just a list folded into your apron pocket. Times when the bells ring late at night, days when someone works past supper without a break, tasks done off the rota and never acknowledged. You don't know why you're doing it exactly, but it feels like a kind of power, a record, a thread pulling tight. Here's your historical fact. In the early 20th century, as industrial workers began organising unions, domestic servants, especially women, were largely left out. Their work was private, isolated, and considered part of a natural social order. But a few groups, like the Domestic Workers' Union of Great Britain and Ireland, began pushing for visibility and rights. Fringe fact? Some aristocrats responded by banning newspapers from the servants' quarters altogether, fearful that labour ideas would infect the help. Others tried to appease their staff with holiday bonuses and mild concessions, hoping to keep them quiet. And the debate. Historians still argue whether domestic service in the Edwardian period was a gilded prison or a lifeline for working-class women. Some saw it as stable employment, better than the factories. Others viewed it as institutionalised obedience, an elegant system of control dressed up in manners and uniforms. One afternoon, you find yourself in the back garden with John. You're supposed to be airing linens. He's meant to be oiling the hinges on the stable doors. Instead, you're both leaning against the low brick wall, watching the clouds move like slow ships across the skeel. You ever wonder what it's like, he says, to wake up and not owe anyone anything? You look at him. Like, not having to wait for a bell? He nods. Or wear a uniform, or asked to go to town. You think for a long moment. I wouldn't even know who I was. He smiles a little sadly. Maybe that's the point. Neither of you says it, but you're both thinking the same thing. Could we leave? Not together, not yet, not even aloud, but it lives there in the silence between you. That night, back in your cot, you open your drawer, you take out the letter, the newsletter, the notes. You fold them all together, then unfold them, fold them again. It feels dangerous, like handling something alive. The next day, the house runs as always. Breakfast is served, shoes are polished, curtains are drawn. No one suspects that the downstairs world is growing restless. No one hears the creaking beneath the polish, but you do, and for the first time you're not afraid of it. You're curious. What happens next? What if the story changes? The house is quieter now, but not in a peaceful way. It's the hush that comes before something breaks, the kind of silence that makes you speak softer, even when no one is listening. There's a stillness in the walls, and you can't tell if it's just another winter settling in, or if the house is holding its breath. You keep to your duties, of course. There's never been a version of your life where that isn't true. Today, it's the drawing room and the second floor hallway. Polish the banister, dust the skirting boards, check the oil in the lamps, though the electric ones are starting to creep in room by room like well-dressed invaders. You've grown used to their faint buzzing now. It almost drowns out the sound of your own thoughts. Almost. Miss Victoria is home again. You hear her before you see her. The purposeful clicking of her boots in the hallway. The way she tosses her gloves down with just enough volume for someone to hear. She's grown harder around the edges since last summer. There are circles under her eyes that rouge can't quite disguise, and when she reads the papers at breakfast, she folds the pages angrily. This morning she says something that stops you mid-sweep. "They're not going to stop, you know. The women in town, they've started setting things on fire." You pause. "Miss," she doesn't look at you directly, just keeps flipping the newspaper. "I'm not saying I approve, but I understand it." You nod because what else can you do? But inside you feel something flicker. The word fire sits in your chest long after she's gone. Later, when you're in the laundry with Maggie, folding handkerchiefs into precise little squares, you finally say it, quietly. "What if we did leave?" She doesn't answer at first, then without looking up. "Where would you go?" You don't know. That's the problem. There's London, of course, but London is a place that swallows girls with no money and no surname. There are shops that hire, cafes that might take you on if you know someone, but you don't. Not really. Still, the idea refuses to die. And you're not alone. Alfred says he's heard of a factory in the north where they pay real wages and let men speak without asking permission. Maggie says her aunt in Bristol has a room, and her cousin just got a job in a dress shop. Whoops. Even John has mentioned Liverpool once or twice, though you never know if he's serious or just trying the thought on for size. You begin making plans. Not loud ones, not written down, just subtle, soft outlines in the quiet corners of the day. You keep your eyes open. You check the ledger in the butler's office when no one's around, scanning names of those who've left before you. Most have no forwarding address, just moved on or left in haste. You wonder where they are now. Did they make it? Did they wake up one morning and breathe without bells? Here's your historical fact. By the end of the Edwardian era, thousands of domestic servants, especially young women, were leaving service each year in search of better pay and independence in cities. Employment in factories, shops and offices began to offer alternatives, though often with their own harsh conditions. Fringe fact, some servants who left service began writing about it, publishing memoirs and anonymous articles. These accounts, often scandalous or bittersweet, challenged the public's romantic view of loyal service and revealed the hard truths of life below stairs. And the debate. Historians still wrestle with how much choice working-class women really had during this time. Was leaving service an act of liberation, or a gamble born from desperation? Some argue that while freedom was appealing, the security of a place often kept many in roles that no longer served them. You get your half day at last, and you walk into town with your coat buttoned up to your chin. It's cold, but your hands are warm in your pockets, clutching a folded scrap of paper with an address written in careful ink. It's a shop, a place looking for help, maybe. You told no one where you were going. You stand across the street from it for a long time, watching the door open and close. There's a bell above it that rings every time someone enters, bright and cheerful and impossibly free. You don't go in, not today, but you saw it. You know it's real. And that's something. You return to the house before anyone notices, brush the frost from your boots, and slip back into your apron like nothing's changed. But something has. That night, as you're setting the coals in the master bedroom fireplace, you catch a glimpse of yourself in the gilt-framed mirror. It's strange how familiar and unfamiliar your own face can be. You look tired, yes, but also sharper, like you've been carved into someone else, someone who might not stay. Later, in the servants' hall, no one says much. Maggie knits. Alfred reads. John sits near the fire, his eyes on the flames like they owe him answers. You clear your throat. If someone left, would you go with them? He doesn't ask who. He doesn't say yes, but he doesn't say no either. And that's enough for now. It's the end of the season, and the house feels tired. Not just the people in it, but the house itself. The rugs have grown thin in places, the paint near the servants' stairwell is flaking, and one of the banisters wobbles if you lean against it too hard. The bell cords seem to ring slower, as if even they are starting to resent their purpose. Lady Honoria and Lord Halberton are leaving for the coast next week, and there's talk of closing the house up for the winter. Just a skeleton staff will remain. Skeleton feels like the right word. What's left when the meat and purpose have gone? You don't know yet if you'll be chosen to stay. You don't know if you want to be. The idea of leaving has settled into your bones now. It used to be a flicker, a forbidden daydream. Now it's a plan you hold in your mind like a folded map. Not all of it is drawn yet, but the road exists. You know that much. You've traced the outlines. There's a crack in the hallway ceiling that no one's ever fixed. You pass under it daily, watching it widen just slightly with the changing seasons. It feels symbolic now. A little bit of truth showing through the plaster. No house, no matter how grand, can stay perfect forever. The drawing room is full of packing crates today. The good silver is being bundled into velvet sleeves, and the formal tea sets are wrapped in paper like they're relics. You're tasked with packing the less breakable things, books mostly. You touch the spines gently, wondering when they were last read, wondering who read them, wondering if you ever could. Miss Victoria watches from the window seat, sipping tea like a lady born to ignore effort. But her eyes are far away. She hasn't been herself lately. She's quieter, sharper. Something in her is changing too. You see it in the way she lingers over the newspaper headlines, in the way she flinches when her mother's voice tightens in public. She doesn't speak until you're almost done. "You could go, you know," she says softly. "You're smart enough." You glance up. "Oh, where, miss?" She shrugs, but it's not careless. It's thoughtful. "Anywhere." It's the second time she's said something like this, and this time you believe her. The next morning you write a letter. It's short, just a few sentences. You say thank you and you ask to be released from your position after the holiday. You tuck it into an envelope and keep it in your pocket all day. You don't give it to the housekeeper, not yet, but it's there, it's real. Here's your historical fact. Many servants in Edwardian Britain gave notice after the end of the season, particularly when households downsized for winter. A surprising number did not return, choosing instead to leave service for good, taking jobs in cities or joining the growing tide of women entering clerical work, nursing or teaching. Fringe fact, some households saw entire wings of staff leave within a single month, leaving panicked housekeepers scrambling to fill posts in time for the new year. Domestic service began to be seen, by some, as a profession in decline, no longer the secure path it once was, and the debate, was the Edwardian servants' exodus a revolution or a quiet dispersal? Some historians frame it as a mass awakening, a realization of self-worth and opportunity. Others see it as a slow unravelling, the natural collapse of a system never designed to last forever. Either way, it ended not with a bang, but with the soft sound of doors closing behind people who never looked back. You find John in the stable-yard that evening, brushing down the old grey mare even though no one's riding her this week. The sky is the colour of faded linen, and the air smells like hay and ash. "I think I'm going," you say. He doesn't turn. "I know." You wait. Then he says, "Bristol?" You nod. He sets the brush down. "I have a brother there. He works the rail. I could write to him." You don't say thank you, you just nod again. It's enough. That night Maggie asks if you're really going. You lie and say you haven't decided yet. She just smiles in that old way of hers and hands you a scarf she's knitted. Blue, warm, a little crooked at the ends. You wear it to bed like armour. The next day you give the envelope to the housekeeper. She opens it in front of you, eyebrows arching slightly as she reads. There's a pause, and then just this. Very well. No protest, no tears, no dramatic confrontation like in the novels. Just permission and a ledger entry. You finish your week without incident. You polish the same brass knobs, sweep the same stairs, but the weight is different. Lighter, sharper, like standing at the edge of something and knowing that when you step forward, the ground will rise to meet you. Your last morning, you wake early. Earlier than usual. The air is soft and still, the house isn't awake yet. You walk the halls one last time, the blue room, the nursery, the dining room with its ever-watching portraits. You stand beneath the great chandelier in the entryway and whisper goodbye, though no one hears. You gather your things, a bag no bigger than a breadbasket, the scarf, a folded letter from Maggie, and the sixpence from last Christmas still tucked in your coat lining. You don't look back when the gate shuts behind you. You don't need to. You've spent enough of your life in someone else's story. It's time to write your own. You don't remember exactly how far you've walked, but your feet are sore and your scarf smells like coal dust and winter. The road behind you is lined with frostbitten hedgerows, and the road ahead curves just out of sight. There's a village in the distance, a real one, not a postcard. Smoke curls from crooked chimneys, and someone's horse knickers as a cart rattles by. No uniforms here, no bells. You pause near a stone wall and sit for a moment, just to feel what it's like, to rest without watching the clock, to let your shoulders fall where they want, to be still not because you must be, but because you choose to be. You reach into your coat pocket and pull out that little sixpence again, warm now from your palm. You turn it over in your hand, remembering the heat of the pudding, the cheer from the table, the clink of cutlery still ringing in your ears. Strange, isn't it? How something so small can remind you of everything, of who you were, of who you're not anymore. The wind picks up, brushing the loose hair from your face. Somewhere a church bell rings, not calling you to work, not marking a rota, just existing. It's an ordinary sound in an ordinary world that you're about to step into, and you do. Boots crunch the gravel, your breath makes little clouds. The house behind you becomes just another shape on the horizon, one of many. Not your prison, not your grave, just a place you once passed through. And ahead, a new place, one where no one owns your tent, where your name belongs to you, where the story is yours to tell. Sweet dreams.